Make a personal note without undue deference, Mr Speaker. I thoroughly appreciate your remarks about standards within the chamber. Mr Speaker, to date, HMRC have not initiated insolvency proceedings against any taxpayer for a loan charge debt. No estimate can be provided for the number of people who have fallen into debt or who have been declared bankrupt and are subject to the loan charge, because where debts arise, HMRC are not always the only creditor. Some individuals are declared bankrupt as a result of a non-HMRC debt, and some may choose to enter insolvency themselves based on their overall financial position.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We know there are many, many thousands of nurses, social workers and other public sector workers who have been caught up by the loan charge. They took work via agencies who told them, basically, sign here or you don't get the work. Checking to see if they'd be liable for the loan charge actually wasn't an option. Last week, the Yorkshire Post reported that a number of former services personnel have been affected and one is feeling suicidal as a direct result. So what does the Minister say to this veteran and the thousands of other public servants whose lives have been turned upside down by this retrospective taxation?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. Taxation is often a difficult matter for the relatively small number of individuals who may be affected by particular pressures. And of course, the government recognises that and understands it. But it is nevertheless the case, it is indeed a foundational principle of the tax system, that people should be responsible for their own tax returns. And if I may, I'd like to refer the Honourable Lady to the very wise words of the former Shadow Chancellor, who said, we would, in 2018, in relation to the loan charge, we would obviously welcome tightening in the area of disguised remuneration schemes. We are concerned that the measures in this bill do not go far enough. There should be no excuse, these are her words, there should be no excuse for people not to be aware of the situation. I'm afraid she was right about that.
Shadow Minister.
Mr Speaker, the Conservative government's approach to the loan charge means that ordinary people who are victims of mis-selling are suffering financial ruin and personal harm. Ministers will have heard some harrowing accounts of people pushed to the very brink and worse, some even tragically taking their own lives. This cannot be what the government envisaged, and a new approach is urgently needed. So will the Treasury now review the loan charge scheme and the approach of HMRC to prevent further devastating consequences?
Well, I thank the Honourable for his question, and of course, as I have said, both the Government and Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs take these cases extremely seriously, and that is why HMRC have put in place extra care and support for people who may be affected by tax issues of this and other kinds. But the fact remains that we have had a review, and I might refer the Honourable Gentleman to the words of his colleague, the member for Ilford North, where he said that of Sir Amias Morse, who did the review, that the review was a thorough piece of work, and we thank him. He has done a great service to Parliament and to the wider public debate. He was right about that, and the Labour Party has been right not to have opposed this policy at any point during its passage in Parliament.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think the problem that members have on both sides of this House is that ordinary people were duped into something, and it's effectively become a retrospective legislation. And I thought the way the Shadow Minister approached this was very reasonable. I do think that the way HMRC are approaching this is not the right approach. Perhaps you could look at it, perhaps the government could look at that again.
Well, I thank the Honourable Friend for his question. I have mentioned the extra care support that HMRC have put in place. I have mentioned the extremely careful approach they've taken with people who may be facing the loan charge. As he will be aware, they have not initiated insolvency proceedings against any taxpayer for a loan charge debt. And that itself is emblematic of the care and attention with which they are taking this subject.
Samuel Wilson.
Okay. It's not enough for the Minister to say that people have to take responsibility for their own tax affairs, when the information that they were given by HMRC was that there was nothing wrong with these schemes initially, when HMRC passed and signed off tax years for people, and when the head of HMRC has admitted that in recent months he had repeatedly tried, this is a Freedom of Information request, and the outcome, in recent months I have repeatedly tried to obtain legal analysis to understand the strength of our claim, with very little success. So there's not even a legal standing for this. How then can the Minister say that it is right to pursue people for things that they were led into, and indeed for payments which HMRC were regularising by allowing contractors to use as a means of paying their employees?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman raised a whole bunch of different questions. Let me just address them. At HMRC, there were some contractors working for agencies and through agencies for HMRC, and where it was discovered that they had used disguised remuneration, those relationships were ended, and very strong measures have been put in place to prevent that recurrence, and that's an unfortunate feature of the extended way in which these contractual arrangements sometimes work. I don't think there's any evidence that HMRC have signed off or positively approved the use of any disguised remuneration scheme, and if the Honourable Gentleman's got an example of that, he'd be welcome to send it to me. In relation to the Chief Executive of HMRC, I think he will be aware that the Chief Executive has specifically written to the APPG to clarify, to make perfectly clear that it is taking those remarks out of context, and what he was doing was putting, as every chief executive of a public agency should do, his own officials under some pressure to provide the justification needed, and rightly so.
Owen Thompson.
Question 2. With permission, Mr Speaker, I would like to answer this question together with questions 5 and 10. HM Treasury analysis published alongside Budget 21 has shown that policy interventions in response to COVID-19 have, on average, supported the poorest working households most as a proportion of pre-pandemic income.
Thompson.
Mr Speaker, the Government's plan to increase national insurance will clearly unfairly impact the living standards of young people and low paid. In sharp contrast, the Scottish Government's free education, bus travel for under 25s and the Scottish Child Payment. Can he confirm how many ministers spoke against this move at Cabinet today, and whether this included the Scottish Secretary? Well, you would have thought, having sought additional powers, he would be more interested in reminding the House on how his own government is using the powers they have. And the key issue is, on many areas, whether it's on the taxpayers that acquire, they're choosing not to use them, for example, to top up universal credit. He should focus on the alliance they've formed with the Greens, which is bad for business, bad for the economy, bad for the oil and gas industry, and counterproductive to growth.
Brown.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In 2016, the Tories promised that fuel bills would be lower for everyone when leaving the EU. The reality is fuel bills are increasing while they're going to do the heartless cut to universal credit. So to tackle fuel poverty, will they use the Net Zero review to cut VAT and energy efficiency products, keep new nuclear off electricity bills, also to provide direct funding for heat decarbonisation and sort out the unfair grid charges in Scottish renewables?
Well, I think, Mr Speaker, one should look at what my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has done. I touched on a moment ago on how the COVID measures have protected the poorest working households the most. If you actually look also alongside that at the budget measures on tax, welfare and spending decisions made since 2019, on average they have benefited all households this year, with the poorest gaining the most as a percentage of net income. That is the approach my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has taken. It is one the Scottish Government should follow.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. More than 3 million children across the United Kingdom living in low-income households are likely to be affected by the £20 universal credit cut, according to Save the Children, with half of claimants saying that they will face significant financial impacts as a result, with 1 in 7 worrying about affording food. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation said the cut will push 500,000 people below the poverty line. Can the Chancellor explain how this squares up with the Government's so-called levelling up agenda?
Well, the key way of tackling poverty is to get people into work and then to skill them up in those jobs. And that is what we have set out through the plan for jobs, and that plan is working. But ultimately, if these are the priorities of the Scottish Government, why are they not using the powers they have to prioritise that?
Mel Stride.
My right honourable friend agree with me that it is difficult to justify raising national insurance in order to fund social care for the predominantly elderly, when the impact of that tax rise would fall mainly on young people and those who are earning little in the workforce? And would he also recognise that those two groups are the very groups that have been most economically impacted by the economic consequences of the pandemic?
Well, my right honourable friend will know the Prime Minister will make a statement shortly. But what he and I would agree on is the best way is to grow the economy, to drive productivity and get people into work and to skill them up through work. And that is what the Plan for Jobs is doing, alongside the £600 billion investment over the course of this Parliament in infrastructure as part of levelling up, as part of our commitment to net zero. So we need to grow the economy, skill the workforce, and for those who have been impacted by the pandemic, get them back into work as quickly as possible.
Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Chief Secretary has had the opportunity to read a recent report by the Institute for Fiscal Studies that says, and I quote, "Material living standards held up surprisingly well through the pandemic. This is an astonishing outcome given the scale of the economic disruption."
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and it is through the package of measures that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, took, that the economic scoring that was forecast for the pandemic, including the figure of unemployment, which will now be 2 million lower at its peak than was estimated. It is those measures, those package of measures, that have helped prevent many of the worst outcomes that were forecast by the OBR as we went into the pandemic.
Mr.
Speaker, one group whose living standards have been impacted during the pandemic has been those low-income individuals who have used buy now, pay later credit products to buy online. I very much welcome the government's announcement earlier in the spring of regulation of this sector. Can the Minister update me on the progress being made in regulating this sector, given it is becoming of increasing importance, as we see from Citizens Advice Bureau reports just last week?
Well, I understand by the end of October there will be reassurance on that, and I'm happy to pick that up with him following the session.
Bridget Phillipson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Chancellor increased universal credit 18 months ago, he said he wanted to look back and remember how we thought first of others and acted with decency. Does the Minister consider that taking £20 a week from millions of families across our country is really an act of decency?
Well, I think, Mr. Speaker, £400 billion of support in response to the COVID pandemic across our public services, individual businesses, shows to the scale of measures that the Chancellor has put in place. But on the specific issue of universal credit, we were always clear that it was going to be temporary. As it is, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, extended it for a further 6 months. But ultimately, what divides the two sides is we believe the best approach is to have a plan for jobs, to get people into work and to upskill them in those jobs. They simply don't have a plan at all.
Lady Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let's think about what £20 a week really means. £20 a week means being able to afford to buy coats for your children this winter. It means not having to worry about turning on the heating when the weather turns cold. Can the Minister offer any advice to families who work hard and play by the rules about how they should manage with £100 less each and every month?
Well, as the honourable lady knows, alongside the universal uplift, there was other measures of support that were given. But I'd actually, rather than my words, I'd quote the Resolution Foundation, who said that since the crisis hit, the support schemes introduced by the government have prevented an unprecedented collapse in GDP from turning into a living standards disaster. That is the package of measures put forward by the government. That is how we have protected people's living standards. But the key is to have a plan, to get that plan working. It is, and that is helping people back into work.
Christopher Cho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend comment upon the living standards of those thousands of public sector employees to whom the government has given exit payments of in excess of £100,000 a year and continues so to do?
Well, my right honourable friend is right to highlight this issue, which he and I have discussed on many occasions. We have I chaired a roundtable in July on this issue across government. It is something that is being prioritised across departments. We have a manifesto commitment which the Chancellor and I are committed to delivering on, and as he knows, there is a £200 million cost to this which we need to tackle. But at the same time, we also need to be true to the manifesto, which was not about tackling those on low incomes who had high payoffs because of the way their pensions benefits are structured and those propriety claims. We need to differentiate between that and what I think is the real ill that he is concerned of, which is those on six-figure salaries who are receiving payoffs, and that is something we are prioritising.
I'm not sure was that related to the original question, so we're going to have to watch out for that in the future. Can I come to SNP spokesperson Alison Thewlis?
Mr Speaker, Scottish hospitality and generosity is world renowned, but could he explain to us why he thinks that Scottish taxpayers should pay for England's social care crisis?
It's a slightly odd question because actually through the broad shoulders of the United Kingdom, it is Scottish jobs that have been protected through the furlough. It is Scottish businesses that have been supported through the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme. It is the block grant that has provided additional funding to the Scottish Government. And the oddity is that they are choosing not to use those uplifts in the Scottish grant to prioritise the things they come down to Westminster and say they care about.
Can I just suggest the Minister might be easier if he goes through the chair? Alison Thewlis.
As well, now the Prime Minister's hike in national insurance has been roundly panned, not least by his own backbenchers and by the chair of the Treasury Select Committee. People in Scotland are already feeling the pain of a decade of Tory austerity cuts, the harms caused by Brexit, with the devastation of the £20 a week cut to universal credit still to come, none of which, Mr Speaker, they voted for. So why should my constituents pay for him to break his manifesto pledge and a new poll tax on the poorest who can least afford it?
Well, it may be helpful, Mr Speaker, to just remind the House of the uplifting funding that the Scottish Government have received as a result of the ability of the UK Government to act across the UK. Baseline funding of £28 billion last year with an additional £8.6 billion of funding, £36.6 billion in total. That has increased to £40.9 billion this year. So the Scottish Government is getting additional funding. As a result of COVID, they have received, Mr Speaker, an additional £14.5 billion, but they are choosing not to prioritise that extra money or use the additional powers they have on tax or welfare to target the issues they say they care about.
Thank
you, Mr Speaker. At the beginning of this pandemic, like most people, I was really worried that unemployment would rise by millions, and I'm delighted that actually it's peaked 2 million below what most people forecast, and that unemployment at 4.7% is actually now at historic lows. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the best way to raise living standards is to get those without jobs into jobs, and for those who already have jobs, give them the training and skills they need so they can get higher paid jobs, and that's exactly what the government's doing.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I very much agree with my honourable friend, and it's as a result of those measures that unemployment has now fallen for 6 months in a row, that the OBR are forecasting a peak of 5 to 6% compared to the previous 12%, and as he quite rightly says, that the peak will be 2 million fewer. But it's not just those who are being helped back into work. It is also the programme of apprenticeships, of traineeships, of job support, of the doubling of work coaches that then will help people in work get into the better jobs that they deserve.
Question number 3.
Minister.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I should like to answer this question together with questions number 6, 8, 9 and 13. The Prime Minister's 10-point plan demonstrates our commitment to net zero. It sets out £12 billion of new government investment in green industries. This will create and support up to 250,000 highly skilled green jobs in the UK. In addition to this £12 billion, our plan will attract up to 3 times as much private investment by providing regulatory certainty and robust green finance frameworks.
The recent Climate Change Committee progress report showed that the Treasury had not fully met a single one of its recommendations in the last year. Does the Minister think this is good enough, and what steps should be taken to rectify this?
Minister.
I'm afraid I don't think that that is what the report has said. What I will say is that there are many publications which we are going to be releasing this autumn around net zero, not least the Net Zero Review, and this final report will be published in advance of COP26. The report will inform sectoral decarbonisation strategies and the net zero strategy, and work on these will continue to develop at pace across Whitehall.
Mr Speaker, the recent cuts to the international aid budget have undermined the UK's leadership in advance of COP26. So what urgent steps will the Treasury take to develop a carbon-neutral programme of international aid going forward?
Minister.
I will ask my counterparts in the FCDO to answer her question directly. They are responsible for aid. But what I will tell her is that there is a lot of stuff that we're doing within our remit on international climate finance action, not least on the task force on nature-related climate financial disclosures.
Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Time and again, I speak with companies who want a free port on Anglesey. I want a free port on Anglesey, and local people want the jobs and local investment that will come with the free port. But the Welsh Government say and do nothing. Mr Speaker, can the Minister please urge the Welsh Government to work with me to deliver this game changer in my constituency of Ynys Moor?
Mr Speaker, I'd like to thank my honourable friend for her letters and continued campaigning for her constituency. We are working with the Welsh Government closely and remain committed to establishing at least one free port in Wales as soon as possible, and I would encourage them to work closely with constituency MPs on this. As in England, specific locations will be chosen in a fair, open and transparent allocation process.
Jeff Smith.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The Minister must recognise that the climate inaction is not just a disaster for the planet, it has a huge financial cost and economic consequences. We can't dodge the critical decisions anymore that we need to decarbonise the economy. So how exactly will the government hardwire our net zero targets into every decision in the upcoming spending review?
Minister.
What I would say to the honourable gentleman is that we have used the Green Book to mandate that policies must be developed and assessed against how well they deliver on the government's long-term policy aims, including net zero. We did this in Spending Review 2020. Guidance required departments to include the greenhouse gas emissions of bids and their impact on meeting carbon budgets and net zero. And allocations to departments were informed by this information, and this is how we will continue to carry out climate impacts in terms of fiscal policy.
Julie Moss.
Thank you. I thank the Minister for her response. With over £10 trillion worth of assets under management in the UK, there is more scope for more green innovation investment to go into via the venture capital sector. So I welcome the measures she's explained and the regulatory changes being driven by the Treasury. But I asked whether she'd meet with me to discuss a potential office for venture, similar to the new Office for Investment, which could provide a centre for expertise and growth in this area.
I thank the honourable lady, my honourable friend, for that question. The government recognises the important role of financial markets in supporting the UK's transition to a net zero economy. The British Business Bank is a government-owned economic development bank that makes finance markets for smaller businesses work more effectively, and their remit does include venture capital. But I note her point about a meeting, and I believe that my honourable friend, the Economic Secretary, would be very happy to meet her on this issue.
Shadow Minister Abana Pongasari.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's only 55 days until COP26 in Glasgow. Households, consumers and businesses urgently need clarity and certainty about how the costs and benefits of our transition to net zero will be shared. Labour's approach to tackling the climate crisis would have fairness at its heart, because we know that while some are planning to build personal heated swimming pools in their homes, millions of others are struggling with energy bills. The Net Zero Review is supposed to consider the issue of fairness. At the last Treasury questions, the Chancellor told my honourable friend for Leeds West that the final report would, and I quote, of course be published imminently. That was 11 weeks ago. Where is it?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said in answer to a previous question, the report will be published in advance of COP26. But we have published other things that she doesn't seem to have heard of or have read. We have set out ambitious plans about net zero target. We've published the energy white paper, the industrial decarbonisation strategy, the transport decarbonisation plan, something that has not happened anywhere in the world. We are the first country in the world to do a transport decarbonisation plan and a hydrogen strategy, and we will publish the heat and building strategy in due course. This government has been very busy setting out plans on net zero. We would appreciate it if the opposition parties actually took some time to read them.
The government's measures will have important consequences for taxpayers and also on energy bills. Can I ask my honourable friend to therefore set out in detail the cost of net zero and also the calculations behind that cost?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. We will put affordability and fairness at the heart of our reforms to reach net zero. And our latest estimates put the costs of net zero at under 2% of GDP, so broadly similar to when we legislated for it 2 years ago, with scope for costs of low-carbon technologies to fall faster than expected. Most of these represent increased investment in growth markets of the future. But I take his point, and all I would say is that he should wait until the net zero review is published.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the previous honourable gentleman and I may not have the same particular views on this, but we both share a concern about how the government will fund net zero, given that we're going to see the reduction in petrol vehicles, for example, and yet what's going to happen to the tax on that? We've seen yet another failure with the Green Homes Grant recently. So what is the fiscal plan for making sure that net zero achieves its targets while we maintain the exchequer balances?
Minister.
I thank the right honourable lady for that question. We recognise that this is an issue that is under intense speculation. We will publish a strategy that will set out many of the answers to the questions which she is posing. What we have said is that we will put affordability and fairness at the heart of our reforms to reach net zero. The fact is, everyone in this House agreed with us when we set that target. We know, for example, that we have put in place plans to bring in electric vehicles by 2030. These will require different changes in how not just we spend, but our tax and regulatory system, and the answers will come in due course.
As Chair of the Hydrogen APPG, can I take this opportunity to welcome the government's world-leading comprehensive hydrogen strategy, backed up by £105 million of public funding to unlock £4 billion of private investment by 2030. Does she agree with me that this is how we'll build back better and create more jobs in places like Teesside?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. I do agree with him. Building back better and building back greener is at the heart of this government strategy. And I thank him for raising the points which he has, which will benefit Teesside and the North East in general.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the weekend, a young activist called Fatima challenged the Chancellor, asking why the Treasury is blocking action on the climate crisis. He replied that the Treasury had committed to 12 billion of new money to the 10-point plan. But even that's not true, as he knows, and the President of COP26 has said actually only a paltry 4 billion is new money. So when will the Treasury start committing serious money to the green transition in the region of the 85 billion that the TUC has said is necessary to put into green investment, so we go into COP26 as climate leaders, not climate laggards?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I will tell the honourable lady what the Treasury is doing. We are issuing £15 billion of green bonds over the next year and launching a world-first green savings bond ahead of COP26 to help finance the government's green project. We set up the UK Infrastructure Bank to invest in net zero, backed by £12 billion of capital, which will also help to unlock more than £40 billion of overall investment in infrastructure. We're committing £11.6 billion in international climate finance over the next 5 years to help developing countries tackle climate change. The budget also announced 3 UK-wide competitions, which are part of the £1 billion net zero innovation portfolio. We have the Towns deal, which is helping people create new green spaces, build back greener, create sustainable transport routes, or repurpose empty shops. The fact is, the Treasury is doing everything it can to support the transition to net zero.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, Chancellor.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I'd like to answer this question with question number 19. It is absolutely right that we remain relentlessly focused on helping young people into work, and our plan for jobs does exactly that with a range of initiatives. And I would just draw colleagues' attention to the fantastic youth offer that our job centres are rolling out, providing 13 weeks of intensive tailored support to those young people who enter universal credit, and creating 140 dedicated youth hubs across the country.
James Daly.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In Bury, Ramsbottom and Tottington, the government's plans for jobs is working, saving jobs and getting people back into employment. But as chair of the APPG for youth employment, can my right honourable friend update the House specifically on how schemes such as Kickstart are helping young people with employment and training opportunities throughout the country?
Chancellor.
Well, Mr Speaker, can I thank my honourable friend for all the work he does as chair of the Youth Employment APPG, and I thank him and his colleagues for their advice as we have developed these initiatives. He's right to highlight Kickstart. This is a signature initiative of this government, providing government-funded, high-quality jobs for young people at risk of long-term unemployment. It's got off to a fantastic start, Mr Speaker, with 50,000 Kickstarters already having started and thousands more to come.
Albert Carney.
Thank you, Speaker. That initial response is helpful, and of course I commend the Chancellor and his Treasury colleagues for their financial support to some businesses over the last 18 months. And I realise important announcements from the Treasury and the Prime Minister are imminent. However, in a city such as Lincoln, with such a vibrant hospitality sector, the cumulative impact of successive lockdowns has hit my constituents hard, especially young people. And my right honourable friend knows they are disproportionately employed in those businesses which are forced to close. Does the Chancellor agree that we must do everything possible to keep the economy open, so that instead of paying young people not to work, we focus on creating well-paid jobs for them?
Chancellor.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the importance of hospitality to employing young people, which is why, together with our VAT cut for that sector and indeed £16 billion of business rates reductions, we've helped support all those jobs. He should also know that actually employers do not pay employers' national insurance on those young people under the age of 21, nor on most apprentices up to the age of 25, demonstrating our support to those employers to keep young people in work.
Boris Johnson.
Mr Speaker, when I was a very young MP, a Conservative Prime Minister introduced a windfall profit tax on the banks. When will this administration and this Chancellor of the Exchequer have the imagination and the leadership to introduce a windfall profit tax on those who have done very well over the last few years and put it into green apprenticeships, green training and green skills, and to do it now?
Well, Mr Speaker, I think that the Honourable Gentleman talking about young people and financial services. I recently was actually in Glasgow talking about young people starting exactly what he described. New apprenticeships in the financial services industry, glowing in Glasgow, supported by this government, who have put more money behind apprenticeships than any government previously.
Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm hearing from colleges that fewer Level 1 and Level 2 students are going to college because, in fact, they're going straight to work, and that's to be commended. But we do know that having a Level 3 increases your earning potential in the long term, and those opportunities to obtain that Level 3, therefore, must be available to these young people as they get older. So how can those young people achieve this when the Chancellor of the Exchequer has cut the adult skills budget by half since 2010?
Chancellor.
Mr Speaker, I point the Honourable Lady to the Prime Minister's speech last year on skills, where he unveiled this government's lifetime skills guarantee, which delivers exactly what she is asking for. So those 10 million adults, which he is absolutely right to highlight, without a Level 3 qualification, will for the first time be able to get one fully funded by this government. That is the Conservative government delivering for people, giving them the skills and the opportunities they need.
Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, it seems to me that the combination of the furlough scheme, the Kickstart scheme, the youth offer that he's just discussed, show that the Chancellor's efforts are leading to the UK having one of the fastest economic recoveries in the world. Will he commit to working globally to ensure that the confidence and opportunities that this brings are available globally as they are increasingly here in the UK?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and can I thank him for two things, Mr Speaker. First of all, when he was a minister, he created traineeships. which he will be pleased to know that this government is tripling the number of to give young people the best possible start in life to find new skills and opportunities. But most importantly this year, Mr. Speaker, because of his success in making sure that this country had the fastest rollout of a vaccine anywhere in the world, we are enjoying the fastest opening up and the fastest economic recovery, and I pay tribute to him for that.
David Linden.
Mr Speaker, the government announced the Kickstart scheme to much fanfare, and at the moment it publishes a breakdown of statistics of Kickstarters by gender and perhaps by race. Why doesn't it do so for disability, and will the Chancellor rectify that?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I'm always happy to look at what more we can do to improve the transparency of our statistics, but with regard to Kickstart in aggregate, I would just say at 50,000 starts, compared to previous versions of similar schemes like the Future Jobs Fund under the last Labour government, Kickstart is delivering more young people into more jobs at a much faster pace, and importantly, many more in the private sector, not just the public sector.
Yeah. Rob Butler.
Number 7, please, Mr. Speaker.
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has rightly wanted to usher in and... Oh, sorry, yes, Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to answer this question together with question number 11. The Prime Minister is rightly ushering in an infrastructure revolution because infrastructure drives growth, it drives productivity and it creates jobs. We are doing that with over £100 billion of investment this year and, thanks to the efforts of the Financial Secretary to the Treasury, a world-leading UK infrastructure bank created, set up in Leeds.
Rob Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that all parts of the country can benefit from investment in infrastructure, and that an excellent way of achieving that in my own constituency of Aylesbury and supporting the very substantial housing development there would be to approve funding for the Aylesbury link of East West Rail, which would also help to achieve our target of net zero?
Chancellor.
I commend my honourable friend. He's absolutely right to focus on making sure our investment reaches every part of the country, including in his constituency. I'm pleased to tell him that £760 million has been allocated by the Chief Secretary and the Transport Secretary to deliver East West Rail, and I understand that the Department for Transport are currently working with the East West Rail Company to figure out the best possible way to serve Aylesbury, and I hope that he will engage with that process.
Ruth Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Infrastructure Forum recently published a report which showed clearly that the super deduction is already having an impact, accelerating investment by businesses. Will my right honourable friend join me in encouraging businesses across Grantham and Stamford to take up the relief? And does he agree that this is exactly the kind of investment that will boost jobs and level up our country?
Chancellor.
Well, Mr. Speaker, from the OBR to the Bank of England, many people have described the super deduction as doing exactly what he has said, and that's why we know it is working. I've recently visited BT, for example, Mr. Speaker, that because of the super deduction are now increasing the speed of their rollout to millions more houses and creating thousands of new jobs in the process. So he's absolutely right. I encourage his businesses to take it up, and indeed we see that, Mr. Speaker. The survey from Deloitte recently showed that business intentions to invest in this country are at the highest they have been in years.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm afraid to tell the Chancellor that his infrastructure revolution is not very noticeable on cities in the north of England which grind to a halt at rush hour. They desperately need infrastructure investment, particularly in public transport. So can he tell the House when he last met with our city region mayors in the north of England and what his plans are for fiscal reform that will help them invest in public transport infrastructure?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my entire team meet with the regional mayors all the time, and we will do, of course, in the run-up to the SRM budget. But with regard to intra-city transportation, I agree with the Honourable Lady, that is important. Unlocking the economic potential of our cities is important to driving our economic recovery, which is why, in the first budget I did last year, we announced £4.2 billion for intra-city transport settlements for our largest several cities outside of London, so they enjoy the same long-term funding that London does and can invest in exactly the types of schemes that she describes.
Chris Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. An investment infrastructure that doesn't get to the South Wales Railway Service, Mr. Speaker. DfT ministers keep announcing increased services along the main line in South Wales, which includes Pencoed and Melbourne constituency, but no increased investment in stations, level crossings, or indeed it's just in the track. When is the Chancellor going to get a grip and start investing in much-needed railway infrastructures in South Wales?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure I entirely recognise the aggregate picture the honourable gentleman presents, because rail investment over the course of this Parliament is at record levels under CP5 and then CP6, to give the technical terms. I'm very happy to take away the specific schemes, which he'll understand are a matter for the Welsh Government, but I'm happy to facilitate with the Department for Transportation as required.
Stephen Hammond.
Mr. Speaker, can I commend my right honourable friend for his commitment to infrastructure, and particularly welcome the British Infrastructure Bank. But can I ask him to consider introducing an infrastructure bond so that long-term pension funds could invest in the future of this country as well?
Well,
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right, and he's previously highlighted the importance of unlocking pension fund capital to invest in long-term assets like infrastructure in the UK. He will know the Prime Minister and I wrote to pension funds just recently discussing this, and my honourable friend, the Economic Secretary, is actively working on creating what's called a long-term asset fund, which will be a new vehicle to unlock exactly the investment he wants into exactly the type of infrastructure that this country needs.
Ben Lake.
Number 12, sir.
Chancellor.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I should like to answer this question together with question numbers 16, 18 and 21. The government has always been clear that the £20 increase to universal credit was a temporary measure, much like furlough and our other interventions, to support this country through the acute phases of this crisis. But, Mr. Speaker, we are not done supporting those who need our help. This government will always be on their side, and that is why we have created our plan for jobs. Because on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we know the best way to help people is to give them the skills and the opportunities they need to find high-quality work, and that is what the plan for jobs is delivering.
Ben Lake.
Speaker, the ending of the uplift will of course mean £286 million less for families in Wales and risk plunging 275,000 families into poverty. Now, figures from the Bevan Foundation suggest that families in Ceredigion stand to lose £5.7 million in support. But what assessment has the Chancellor made of the economic impact of ending the £20 a week uplift for communities in Wales?
Chancellor.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman talks about those in poverty. The statistics most recently published show that 200,000 fewer people are living in absolute poverty in the United Kingdom than when this government came into office. And with regard to the economic impacts, I think all colleagues on this House can see the strength in our labour market, the need for businesses to find people, and the fact that this government is giving them the skills they need to get those jobs. That's the right strategy to help people, and that's the economic strategy that this government is pursuing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst the Chancellor was pondering the colour of the tiles for his new swimming pool and the size of his new tennis court this summer for his country mansion, back in the real world, 20% of my constituency in Liverpool West Derby are facing a £20 a week cut to universal credit and facing sleepless nights about how they will survive. Can the Chancellor tell me what impact assessment the government have made on the impact of the cut, and how many of the 12,530 people in Liverpool West Derby do they estimate will be forced into poverty?
Chancellor.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't accept that people will be forced into poverty, because we know, and all the evidence and history tells us, the best way to take people out of poverty is to find them high-quality work. And we are creating jobs at a rapid rate. 8 months of continuous growth in employment, Mr. Speaker, supported by this government. Traineeships, sector-based work academies, apprenticeships, Kickstart, you name it, we are delivering it to help those people in Liverpool get the skills and the jobs they need to help support their families.
Timms.
Mr. Speaker, 40% of the people who claim universal credit are already in work. Does the Chancellor understand that they will be very hard hit by this cut, which is the biggest overnight benefit cut in our history?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, of course there are people already in work who are on universal credit, but our plan for jobs helps them too. We increased the national living wage this year by an inflation-busting amount, £350 a year to help those families. We talked earlier about the lifetime skills guarantee, about apprenticeships, about skills boot camps. Those are all ways that this government is supporting people, all, by the way, Mr. Speaker, worth thousands of pounds of support, each one of those initiatives, But those people will benefit from those increased skills, benefit from guaranteed new job interviews or higher wages at the end of it. That's the right strategy to help those people in work.
Alex Davis-Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This week, the charity Action for Children highlighted that a street cleaner with 2 children in private rented accommodation is already on average £729 worse off as a result of Conservative cuts since 2010. But this will soar to over £1,700 as a result of the Chancellor's planned cut to universal credit. So I ask the Chancellor, how exactly are families meant to manage?
Well, again, Mr Speaker, what we know is that children growing up in workless households are 5 times more likely to be in poverty than those whose parents work, which is why we are supporting their parents to get in work, which is why almost 800,000 fewer children are living in workless households than when this government first came into office. And, Mr Speaker, that is the right way to support those families. Of course, there are other bits of our welfare system that we have maintained the generosity of, but when it comes to universal credit or employment, on this side of the House, we will support their parents into work and, crucially, with their childcare costs. Mr Speaker, we forget 85% of people's childcare costs on universal credit are covered to support their parents into work, which we know will make a difference to those children.
Stephen Timms.
Question 1, Speaker.
Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Over the year ago, the government launched its plan for jobs, a comprehensive and ambitious plan to help people back into work, to earn more and to gain the skills they need to succeed in the jobs of tomorrow. The latest data shows that our GDP, our economy is recovering quickly, unemployment is falling, jobs are being created, and indeed, household incomes have been protected. All of that tells me, Mr Speaker, that this government's plan for jobs is working.
Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Cutting universal credit by £20 a week will hit working families very hard. It will leave support for unemployed families at the lowest real terms level for over 30 years. It will undermine the recovery, scupper the prospects for levelling up. Does the Chancellor of the Exchequer understand why every single former Work and Pension Secretary since 2010 has opposed his cut?
Chancellor.
Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman talks about economic recovery. We are forecast this year to grow faster than any other country in the G7. The recovery is underway, Mr Speaker. Jobs are being created. People are getting into work. Wages are rising. That is the right strategy for us to pursue, Mr Speaker. Our plan is working and we will stick to it.
Mr Speaker, will the Chancellor provide an update on the follow-up to the discussions we've had on maintained nursery schools, and will he urgently bring forward a long-term funding settlement for these brilliant schools?
Yeah, Chancellor.
Mr Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight this issue, which I know is of particular importance to her and her constituency. I can assure her that I've spoken to my team about it, and as part of the spending review, we'll further those discussions with DFE, and I look forward to the Chief Secretary and her and I talking about this issue again.
Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor's plans to increase national insurance will hit workers and businesses hard at the worst possible time. The British Chamber of Commerce describe it as a drag anchor on jobs growth. The Federation of Small Businesses state that if this hike happens, fewer jobs will be created. And the TUC say that it is wrong to hit young and low-paid workers while leaving the wealthy untouched. We agree. Mr Speaker, could the Chancellor of the Exchequer therefore explain why he is choosing a tax on jobs rather than on other forms of income?
Mr Speaker, I'm very pleased to see the Labour Party finally focus on the importance of jobs in this House. And we also agree it's important to support companies to hire people, which is why, Mr Speaker, there is no national insurance payable on those employing people under the age of 21, no national insurance payable on those most apprentices up to the age of 25, nor on people who are going to be employed in new free ports. And because of the steps that these Conservative governments before and ours have made to the employment allowance, 40% of all small businesses pay no employers' national insurance at all.
Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. You can't have it both ways. Either national insurance being cut benefits jobs or it doesn't. The Chancellor told voters at the election, and I quote, "Our plan is to cut taxes for the lowest paid through cutting national insurance." That promise is now in flames. The Chancellor isn't cutting national insurance, he is putting it up. It cannot be right that nurses and builders are set to pay hundreds of pounds more each year in national insurance, yet those getting their incomes from a large portfolio of shares, stocks and property will pay not a penny more. Labour cannot and will not support this Tory government's manifesto-breaking, economically damaging and unfair tax on jobs. So let me ask the Chancellor again. Why won't this government fund health and social care in a way that is fair for families and for businesses?
Chancellor. Mr Speaker, I'll be brief. When the Honourable Lady was appointed Shadow Chancellor, she said, and she went out of her way to say, that any policies that the Labour Party put forward under her watch would be, and I quote, fully costed, and we will explain how they are paid for. Mr Speaker, we've heard about uplifts to welfare, we've heard about more money for public sector pay, we've heard about opposing every difficult and responsible decision that this government has made. We have not heard once, Mr Speaker, how the Labour Party would pay for anything, and we know what happened last time around when they did that.
Dr. Luke Evans. Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Levelling Up Fund is about improving a region. Here in Bosworth, we're putting forward the Twycross Zoo for their National Centre of Conservation and Education. It'll be a world-leading scientific education and conservation centre, driving tourism and the local economy. It's backed by the Borough Council, the County Council, the LEP and the Midlands Engine. Would the Chancellor like to come and visit it? And failing that, would he like to meet me to discuss how we can make this a symbol of the levelling up for the nation?
But I don't know about the Chancellor. I'm sure my children would love to come and visit the zoo. Well, I'd like to thank my honourable friend for putting forward a bid for the Levelling Up Fund. As he will know, bids are currently subject to competitive assessment against objective criteria. But I think more generally, I think the whole House will welcome that zoos are once again fully open to the public this summer, and they do provide a wide range of valuable benefits.
Gaskell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The North Sea oil and gas bounty from the North Sea saw Scottish communities other than in Shetland fail to benefit from the bounty landing on their shores. Now that North Sea is having the offshore wind benefit casting ashore on East Lothian, can the Treasury ensure that East Lothian will actually benefit from the wind coming ashore, as opposed to simply being transmission stationed on down south? Is it to be able to benefit, or will it go the same way as Scotland's oil and gas, down to the Treasury?
Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. We support the UK oil and gas sector, especially as gas is a transition, it's a transition fuel to net zero, and the sector supports 147,000 jobs directly in their supply chains. I take the point that he has mentioned. If he would like to write to me with more detail, I think that is something that I'd be able to give him more comprehensive answers on.
Sir David Evanet.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I commend my right honourable friend on all his determination to create new jobs, new investment and upskill the workforce. And it's paying dividends, I believe, as we see in the economy at the moment. But would he agree with me that FE colleges have a vital role in upskilling our workforce, both young and not so young, to get the best jobs for the future?
Our honourable friend is absolutely right about the important role of FE colleges, which is why I was pleased in the last budget to invest billions over this Parliament to improve the infrastructure, the quality of our FE estate, and with the Prime Minister's lifetime skills guarantee, they will be instrumental in delivering all adults that extra qualification they need to get better paid jobs, and he's absolutely right to focus on it.
Damanjeet Singh Dassi.
Thank you very much. Mr Speaker, the government should lead by example with its spending power and the design of public contracts to buy more from Great Britain, as Labour would. But the UK strategic steel sector has been neglected by this Conservative government, and highly skilled jobs have been lost because a huge proportion of our steel is purchased from other nations, including for HS2. So can the Chancellor explain why is it that his government does not even have a non-binding target for the use of our own steel
in our national public infrastructure projects?
Minister.
Well, the honourable gentleman raises, I think, a very valid point, and it is right that we maximise the opportunities of domestic suppliers. That is something my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, is focusing on through the industrial strategy, but it also links to targeting those innovation sectors, the 7 innovation sectors funded through the significant uplift in our research and development budget.
Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very hard in Shropshire on a £500 million investment in modernising A&E services in our local hospital. There is a funding shortage. I have written to the Chancellor on this issue, and I'd be very grateful for a response. There is nothing more important than modernising A&E services for the safety of our patients and constituents.
Minister.
Well, I know this is a very important constituents issue and one that he has championed frequently. He will know through the long-term plan there is a £33.9 billion uplift in core funding, in addition to the other funding through COVID and other measures that my right honourable friend announces. But very happy to discuss with him. I know it's a key constituency issue and he's right to focus on it.
Kate Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Research from the Disabled Children's Partnership has revealed that nearly 3/4 of disabled children have seen their progress managing their conditions regress in the pandemic as vital services have been delayed. Ahead of the forthcoming spending review, will the Minister consider offering a lifeline to families and fund dedicated recovery to help disabled children and their families catch up on missed services?
Chancellor.
I thank the honourable lady for raising her question. It's an important point. I'd be very happy to make sure that that gets considered as part of the spending review.
Martin Vickers. Martin Vickers.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor referred earlier to the record amounts being invested in the rail network. Could I urge him to ensure that one of those projects that he supports is an east-west freight corridor linking the Humber ports to the west coast that would greatly maximise the benefits of the free port status and also aid the levelling up agenda?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have no doubts of the importance and the merits of his Freeport approach, not least from an early morning meeting he and I had, I think, last week on that very topic. Of course, as part of the integrated rail plan, we're looking at how we link that to levelling up across the UK, and he's quite right to highlight the growth and productivity opportunity that Freeports offer.
Pete Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the last budget, the Chancellor gave a £25 billion tax break to the top 1% of businesses in the form of the super deductor. But when the school catch-up czar came to him asking for £15 billion over a 3-year period, he said he can't fund everyone who comes knocking at his door. Why is it when an Amazon-style business comes knocking, the door is wide open? When students come knocking, asking for money to get over the challenges of the last few years, the door is slammed in their face.
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, it's just absolutely not right. When it comes to the super deduction, what the party opposite will never understand is we want to support businesses to create jobs. That's what the super deduction does. I just gave him the example of BT creating thousands of new jobs because of the super deduction. And when it comes to education, this government has invested £3 billion, £800 a pupil, on helping them catch up with lost education, on top of a record increase in schools funding, which means per pupil funding in real terms at the end of this Parliament will be the highest it's been in over a decade.
Jobs are the most important thing to help communities move forward, and if you've been out of work for 12 months or more, you can access the Restart scheme, nearly £3 billion paid. Will my honourable friend make sure that actually that's part of his plans moving forward to help everybody get proper, decent work and decent training to get the right job?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight both the importance of Restart in terms of those long-term unemployed, but also how that sits alongside the Kickstart scheme, the tripling of traineeship, the boot camps for skills, and that is part of a plan for jobs that is working.
Alex Davis-Jones.
Chancellor, clarify which government department is actually paying the £200 million for the Prime Minister's vanity yacht, and what does it say about this Conservative government's warped priorities when the Chancellor approves this while planning to cut universal credit from those who need it the most?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, this government is proud of the record investment it's made in our armed forces. Record settlement for the next few years to support our armed forces and the work they do around the world, and making sure that we can play our responsible role. And, Mr. Speaker, we'll end on this note, I think. we've had a good debate today, but one thing is clear. The difference between us and the party opposite, we believe in supporting people into work, Mr. Speaker. We believe in supporting their skills, Mr. Speaker. And crucially, we believe in our plan for jobs because it is working.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Chancellor for his willingness to take extremely difficult decisions to fix the crisis in waiting lists on the NHS and the problems in the social care system. The Select Committee heard this morning we need 4,000 more doctors to tackle the backlog. So does he agree this is about reform as well as money, particularly in the way we plan our workforce?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend speaks on these matters with extreme authority and experience, and I thank him for all the engagement he's had with me and others on these topics. He's right to make sure that we have a long-term plan for people in the NHS. He will know we are committed to delivering 50,000 more nurses, Mr. Speaker, 50 million more primary care appointments, and as part of that, we must make sure we get GPs right as well, and I look forward to working with him on that.
Mr. Speaker, since the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have already decided to break their manifesto commitment on overseas aid and are now gearing up to break their solemn manifesto promises on the tax lock and on the pensions triple lock, why should any voter believe that a Tory manifesto promise is worth the paper it's written on ever again?
Chancellor. Mr. Speaker, what people know they get from this Conservative government is a government that is on their side, a government that is delivering their priorities, whether it's 50,000 more nurses, whether it's 20,000 more police officers, whether it's record investment in every part of our country, whether it is a government that is creating jobs and prosperity wherever you live. This is a government, Mr. Speaker. It says in that document it's a people's government, and that is what we are delivering.
Final question, David Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that this government is listening to the levelling up agenda, especially in the north of England. And on that note, I would like to say that the best way of getting people back into work is by putting new initiatives forward. Will the Chancellor meet me shortly to talk about the Eden Project North?
Chancellor.
I'd be very happy to, Mr. Speaker.
We now come to the statement. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will make a statement on the government's plans for health and social care. Our National Health Service is the pride of our whole United Kingdom, and all the more so after it has been there for us during the worst pandemic in a century, treating almost 500,000 patients, administering more than 88 million vaccines, and saving countless lives. But the inevitable consequence of this necessary and extraordinary action is that COVID has placed massive pressures on our NHS. As we stayed at home to protect the NHS, thousands of people did not come forward for the treatment they needed. Like those who suffer from COVID, these are all people we know. Your aunt, who needs a new hip. Your neighbour, who has problems with their heart and needs a pacemaker. Your friend at work, who thinks that they should get that lump or cough checked out. So we must now help the NHS to recover, to be able to provide this much-needed care to our constituents and the people we love, and we must provide the funding to do so now. We not only have to pay for the operations and treatments that people decided not to have during the pandemic, we need to pay good wages for the 50,000 nurses who will enable that treatment and who can help us tackle waiting lists that could otherwise expand to 13 million over the next few years. We need to now go beyond the record funding we have already provided, and we need to go further than the 48 hospitals and 50 million more GP appointments that are already in our plan. So today we are beginning the biggest catch-up programme in NHS history, tackling the COVID backlogs by increasing hospital capacity to 110% and enabling 9 million more appointments, scans and operations. As a result, while waiting lists will get worse before they get better, the NHS will aim to be treating around 30% more elective patients by 2024-2025 than before COVID. And we will also fix the long-term problems of health and social care of health and social care that the party opposite certainly failed to tackle, Mr. Speaker, and that have been so cruelly exposed by COVID. But having spent £407 billion or more to support lives and livelihoods throughout the pandemic, from furlough to vaccines, it would be wrong for me to say that we can pay for this recovery without taking the difficult but responsible decisions about how we finance it. As a permanent additional investment in health and social care, it would be irresponsible to meet the costs from higher borrowing and higher debt. From next April, we will create a new UK-wide 1.25% health and social care levy on earned income hypothecated in law to health and social care, with dividend rates increasing by the same amount. This will raise almost £36 billion over the next 3 years, with money from the levy going directly to health and social care across the whole of our United Kingdom. This won't be pay awards for middle management. It will go straight to the front line at a time when we need to get more out of our health and social care system than ever before. And it will enable radical innovation to improve the speed and quality of care, including better screening equipment to diagnose serious diseases such as cancer more quickly, designated surgical facilities so non-urgent patients are no longer competing with A&E, faster GP access to specialists so you don't have to wait months to see someone in hospital to find out whether something is wrong, and new digital technology so doctors can monitor patients remotely in their homes. And we will do all this in a way that is right and reasonable and fair. Mr. Speaker, some will ask why we don't increase income tax or capital gains tax instead. But income tax isn't paid by businesses, so the whole burden would fall on individuals, roughly doubling the amount that the basic taxpayer could expect to pay. And the total revenue, Mr. Speaker, from capital gains tax amounts to less than £9 billion this year. Instead, our new levy will share the cost between individuals and businesses, and everyone will contribute according to their means, including those above state pension age. So those who earn more will pay more. And because we are also increasing dividends tax rate, we will be asking better off business owners and investors to make a fair contribution too. In fact, the highest earning 14% will pay around half the revenues. No one earning less than £9,568 will pay a penny. And the majority of small businesses will be protected, with 40% of all businesses paying nothing at all. And while Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have their own system, we will direct money raised through the levy to their health and social care services. So in total, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland will benefit from an extra £2.2 billion a year, Mr. Speaker. And as this is about 15% more than they will contribute through the levy, it will create a union dividend worth £300 million, Mr. Speaker. Worth £300 million. But, Mr. Speaker, we can't just put more money in. We need reform and change. We need to build back better from COVID. When the COVID storm broke last year, there were 30,000 hospital beds in England occupied by people who could have been better cared for elsewhere and who wanted to be better cared elsewhere. That's 30,000, Mr. Speaker, out of 100,000 hospital beds in our NHS, costing billions every night and unable to be used by people needing cancer care, needing hip operations, making it harder than ever to deal with the growing backlog in our NHS. Too often, people were in hospital beds because they or their relatives were worried about the cost of care in a residential home. And that same fear kept many others at home without any care at all. This anxiety affects millions of people up and down the country. The fear that a condition like dementia, one of nature's bolts from the blue, could lead to the total liquidation of their assets, their lifetime savings, their home, the loss of everything that they might otherwise pass on to their children, however great or small. While sufferers from other diseases who have to be in hospital for the majority of their treatment have their care paid for in full by the NHS. Governments have ducked this problem for decades. Parliament even voted to fix it. And yet that 30,000 figure is an indictment of the failure to do so. And so, Mr. Speaker, there can be no more dither and delay. We know we can't rely solely on private insurance because demand would be too low for insurers to offer an affordable price. And a universal system of free care for all would be needlessly expensive when those who can afford to contribute to their care should do so. Instead, the state should target its help of protecting people against the catastrophic fear of losing everything to pay for the cost of their care. And that is what this government will do. We are setting a limit on what people can be asked to pay. And we will be working with the financial services industry to innovate and help people to insure themselves against expenditure up to that limit. Wherever you live, whatever your age, your income or your condition, from October 2023, no one starting care will pay more than £86,000 over their lifetime, and no one with assets less than £20,000 will have to make any contribution from their savings or housing wealth. That's up from £14,000 today. Meanwhile, anyone with assets between £20,000 and £100,000 will be eligible for some means-tested support. And this new upper capital limit of £100,000 is more than 4 times the current limit, helping many more people with modest assets. And as we fix this long-term, long-standing problem in social care, we will also address the fears that many have about how their loved ones will be looked after, by investing in the quality of care, in carers themselves, and by integrating health and care in England. So older people and disabled people are cared for better, with dignity, and in the right setting. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, will be bringing forward a white paper on integration later this year. Mr. Speaker, you can't fix the COVID backlogs without giving the NHS the money it needs. And you can't fix the NHS without fixing social care. You can't fix social care without removing the fear of losing everything to pay for social care. And you can't fix health and social care without long-term reform. The plan that this government is setting out today, the plan I'm setting out today, will fix all of those problems together. And of course, no Conservative government, Mr. Speaker, ever wants to raise taxes, and I will be honest with the House, I accept that this breaks a manifesto commitment, which is not something I do lightly, but a global pandemic was in no one's manifesto, Mr. Speaker. And I think the people of this country understand that in their bones, and they can see the enormous steps this government and the Treasury have taken. And after all the extraordinary actions that have been taken to protect lives and livelihoods over the last 18 months, this is the right, the reasonable and the fair approach, enabling our amazing NHS to come back strongly from the crisis, tackling the COVID backlogs, funding our nurses, making sure people get the care and treatment they need in the right place at the right time, and ending a chronic and unfair anxiety for millions of people and their families up and down this country, and I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. I think I had almost as much notice as the Cabinet. Can I also thank everybody who works in the NHS and social care? Mr Speaker, during the darkest days of the pandemic, they kept our health service from collapsing, they looked after the elderly when others couldn't, and they rolled out the vaccine, which has finally provided the light at the end of the tunnel. Despite their efforts, we're facing the toughest winter in the history of our health service. Not only do we have the threat of another COVID surge, waiting lists for diagnosis and treatment have reached record levels, we risk cancer survival rates going backwards for the first time ever, and social care remains neglected and strained. It is a crisis. But how did we get here, Mr Speaker? The pandemic has undoubtedly placed the NHS under huge strain, but that is only part of the story. A decade of Conservative neglect weakened the NHS. Waiting lists had spiralled up 2 million before the pandemic. Targets were missed on cancer, on A&E, on mental health before the pandemic. The same is true, Mr Speaker, on social care. £8 billion cut despite growing demand before the pandemic. Carers on poverty wages without secure contracts before the pandemic. 100,000 vacancies before the pandemic. And the Prime Minister has just referenced the 30,000 hospital beds occupied by those that should go into the community. And he called that, this is before the pandemic, an indictment of failure. Who had been in government for 10 years at that stage? Just remind me. An indictment, Prime Minister, an indictment of failure is an accurate description of the situation in our health service and social care before the pandemic. So the pretence that the Prime Minister is only here because of the pandemic is not going to wash. He's putting a sticking plaster over gaping wounds which his party inflicted. He made that commitment on social care before the pandemic, and he said he would pay for it without raising taxes before the pandemic. Yes, Mr Speaker, the NHS urgently needs more investment. But the backlog will not be cleared unless the government hits the 18-week target set out in the NHS Constitution. The Prime Minister didn't mention that. It was set and it was met by the last Labour government. So if there's to be improvements, Prime Minister, a direct question, can the Prime Minister commit today to hitting the target and clearing the backlog by the end of this Parliament? Yes or no? I know he likes to avoid these questions, but if he can't answer that basic question, it's clear he hasn't got a plan. Turning to social care. Mr Speaker, turning to social care. Under these proposals, people will still face substantial costs. And I heard what the Prime Minister says, so another direct question for him. Can the Prime Minister guarantee that under his plan, no one will have to sell their home to fund their own care? Yes or no? But social care, well, he just told us, let's hear him make that commitment at the dispatch box, that no one under his plan will have to sell their own home to fund their own care, and then we'll come back to it. But social care, Mr Speaker, is about so much more than this. The blunt and uncomfortable truth is that under the Prime Minister's plans, the quality of care received will not improve. There's no plan for that. People will still go without the care that they need. There's no plan for that. Unpaid family carers will still be pushed to breaking point. There's no plan for that. Working-age adults with disabilities will have no more control under their lives. There's no plan for that. Pay and conditions will not improve for care workers. There's no plan for that. Let me spell that out. A poorly paid care worker will pay more tax for the care that they're providing without a penny more in their pay packet and without a secure contract. Prime Minister shakes his head. My sister is a poorly paid care worker, Prime Minister, so I know this firsthand. This is a tax rise that breaks a promise that the Prime Minister made at the last election. A promise that they all made at the last election, every single one of them. A tax rise on young people, supermarket workers and nurses. A tax rise, Mr Speaker, that means a landlord renting out dozens of properties won't pay a penny more, but the tenants working in full-time jobs would. A tax rise that places another burden on business just as they're trying to get back on their feet. Mr Speaker, read my lips. The Tories can never again claim to be the party of low tax. The alternative, Mr Speaker, is obvious. A timetable and plan to clear waiting lists, just as we did under the last Labour government. A comprehensive reform plan for social care, dealing with the inadequacies I've just pointed out, and driving up the equality of provision. And not just tinkering with the funding model. We do need to ask those with the broadest shoulders to pay more. And that does include asking much more of wealthier people, including income from stocks, from shares, from dividends and from property. Chancellor, I was listening. But fiddling, and the Chancellor knows the numbers just as well as I do, he'll have done the sums and we've done them, tinkering and fiddling with the dividend won't do that. Instead, the government is placing the primary burden on working people and businesses struggling to get by. As I've said to the Prime Minister, if the government comes forward with a plan to genuinely fix the crisis in social care and has a fair funding model, then we will work together. Thousands of families struggling with the current system, who only want the best for their loved ones, deserve nothing less. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think we now we know why over decades the Labour government totally refused to deal with this problem. And now we know why both Blair and Brown failed to do it. The right honourable gentleman has absolutely no plan. I was waiting, Mr Speaker. I'm amazed that he sat down. What is his answer to the backlogs in the NHS? And what is his answer to the problems in social care? They have absolutely no plan, Mr Speaker. They have no idea how they would raise the money. Just to answer some of his questions, we of course will be investing in social care, and I thank his sister for what she's doing in social care. But we have lifted people's wages across the country with the living wage, Mr Speaker, with record increases in the living wage. We're investing in 700 training places for people in social care, and making sure we invest 500 million. That's in the plan today. 500 million care in the social care workforce, Mr Speaker. But what this is also doing is enabling us to get our wonderful NHS back on its feet and enable it to deal with the backlogs. And what he totally failed, Mr Speaker, is to explain how the Labour government would do it. 1 year of capital gains tax would even begin to deal with this problem, Mr Speaker. He has not got a solution, and I think it is deeply irresponsible of him to come to this place without having any kind of alternative. This is the government. Under them, let's be no doubt. If we did what we've heard from the Labour Party over the last few weeks, Mr Speaker, we'd still be in lockdown, Mr Speaker. We'd still be in lockdown because he opposed coming out of stage 4. We'd have absolutely nothing by way of dealing with the NHS backlogs. And after decades, Mr Speaker, of inertia from the Labour Party, we'd have absolutely no way of dealing with the anxiety of millions of families across this country who face the prospect of catastrophic costs of social care. This government is dealing with those. We're dealing with all of them. We're getting on with it. We're taking the decisive action. We're doing it all together. This is the government that gets on and deals with the people's priorities. This is the government that tackles social care, and indeed, this is the party of the NHS.
Mr Speaker, raising taxes is an incredibly difficult thing for any Conservative government to do. So can I thank the Prime Minister for biting the bullet on this intractable issue that I and many former health secretaries have wrestled with? Does he agree that the demographic challenge, which I know he's personally trying to address with a bit of population growth in Downing Street, does he agree that that challenge
means that whether you pay insurance in America, social insurance in Germany, or taxes in the UK, everyone is going to pay more for their health and care, and any government has a responsibility to make sure that resources are allocated where the electorate's priorities are, and in this country it is health and social care.
I thank my right honourable friend for his support, but I also thank him for all the campaigning and hard work that he did when he was Secretary of State, the first Secretary of State both for the NHS, both for health and for social care, because he sees that these two things go together, unlike the party opposite, and I believe that what he has said is entirely correct.
Ian Blackford, the Leader of the SNP.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement. Mr Speaker, if I quote, "And while Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have their own systems, we will direct money raised through the levy to their health and social care services." Let me tell you, Prime Minister, that health is devolved to the Scottish Government. The Prime Minister can get his mitts off our health system because the people in Scotland trust the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government to run health, and they certainly don't trust the Prime
Order. Quite rightly, we heard the Prime Minister, we heard the Leader of the Opposition. I expect everybody to listen to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, but when we have an attack on devolution, we have the baying mob of the Tories trying to shout down the voices from Scotland. Mr Speaker, government briefings in advance of the statement on social care told us that this was supposedly a key part in securing the Prime Minister's legacy in office. Well, the Prime Minister is certainly creating a legacy, but it's definitely not one in his vivid imagination. The real legacy of this government is now well defined: a Tory government that blatantly breaks manifesto promises and blatantly breaks international law. And it is very telling that as we hopefully emerge from this COVID crisis, the first act of this Prime Minister is to impose this regressive tax. Because the scandal of the tax hike is it will fall hardest on the young and the lowest paid, the two groups who have suffered the worst economic consequences of the pandemic. Pre-COVID and post-COVID, the pattern is the same, and this government has learnt nothing. Westminster keeps adding to the growing burden that young people face, while stripping them of the benefits that previous generations enjoyed. But, Mr Speaker, the unfairness of this tax hike will be especially felt in Scotland. The Scottish Government is responsible for social care and already funds provisions from existing budgets and tax receipts, including SNP policies such as free personal and nursing care. Mr Speaker, we have done it. And as the Prime Minister well knows, by raising this levy across the UK, the Tories are taxing Scottish workers twice and forcing them to pay the bill for social care in England as well as at home in Scotland. This is the Prime Minister's poll tax on Scottish workers to pay for English social care. Scottish people remember that it's this Prime Minister who said that, and I quote, "A pound spent in Croydon is of much more value to the country than a pound spent in Strathclyde." So can the Prime Minister explain to the people of Strathclyde and people across Scotland why he's now going after the pounds in their pockets to solve a social care problem in Westminster that has failed to fix problems in Croydon and right across England? If their pounds are really of the less value, as the Prime Minister claims, then why are we paying the price? Is the Prime Minister willing to stand up and explain to families in Scotland why we're being hit by another Tory poll tax?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the NHS is a UK institution and we're all proud of it, and we are proud of what NHS Scotland does as well. And he is completely wrong, Mr Speaker, in what he says about those who pay this tax. The burden falls most heavily on those who have the broadest shoulders, as it should, and it is the richest 14% who pay at least half the taxation. And as I've just explained to the House, there is a massive union dividend of £300 million across the whole of the United Kingdom, and the whole of the UK will find more money for health and social care. And that, I think, is what the people of Scotland will understand.
Andrew Ledson.
Speaker,
There'll be millions of people right across the country who are so relieved today that at last health and social care is going to be resolved for fairness to everyone. But can the Prime Minister reassure the many people who are very concerned about prevention, early intervention, providing support for families with the very youngest children in our society so that they too can have healthy lives and fulfilled lives throughout the United Kingdom?
I want to thank my right honourable friend for everything she does on this issue on early years. She and I have campaigned on this together. I've listened to her attentively over many years, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, is determined to ensure that we get the proper funding for early years, because the investment you make in those first 3 years repays society and families massively.
Dame Margaret Hodge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Let's set aside for a moment the Prime Minister's unrivalled record on reneging on his promises. But today he has chosen what I consider to be the least progressive option to fix both our health and social care system. It's unfair between generations, it's unfair between individuals, and it's unfair between those who derive their income from assets or from work. He's ignoring a raft of better alternatives, raising income tax, dividend tax being equivalent to income tax or capital gains tax. Why?
Well, for the simple reason that I gave earlier on, Mr Speaker, is that none of those measures raise anything like the funding that we need. I've explained that very clearly to the House. I think colleagues understand it. I think the country understands it. I think people are very suspicious, Mr Speaker. They know that this country has been through an enormous fiscal impact from the pandemic. They know that the government has put its arms around people, spent £407 billion. They're going to be very suspicious of a government that pretends it can get the NHS back on its feet without some kind of serious, responsible, fair fiscal effort, and that's what we're doing.
Steve Barclay.
Much, Mr Speaker. I pay tribute to my right honourable friend for gripping this issue. We are not in government just to be afraid of doing anything for fear of offending anyone, as others. I'll study the plans the PM has promised to set out, and I want to thank him for them. But I just want to ask him, on behalf of my constituents and their families trapped right now in the spiral of rising care costs and their fast disappearing resources. As we develop this new system which he's promised, can I urge the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary to consider those for whom this is their present, not just those looking many years into the future?
Good point. I absolutely agree with what my honourable friend has said, and that's the tragedy of decades of failure to tackle this. That people are now facing these costs. But what we're doing is investing, as we have done throughout the pandemic, I think about £6 billion in dealing with the immediate costs of social care to try to help people through this very difficult time. But what this package offers is a way of developing a long-term solution, enabling, we hope, the private sector to come in and give people a long-term plan to fix the costs of their own social care, knowing that the government will remove the risk of those catastrophic costs. That is the advantage of what we're doing today.
John Trickett.
Mr Speaker, and putting aside the unfairness of the national insurance tax rise which he's proposing, isn't the cap on expenditure really going to be his poll tax? And I say that because in his constituency, in Uxbridge, the average price of a house is $500,000. In parts of mine, it's $130,000. So that will leave people in his constituency with an inheritance of over £410,000 per family. In mine, £44,000 per family. It's unjust. It's unfair. It isn't about levelling up, is it, Prime Minister? It's about doubling down on everything that's wrong. Yet again, the poorest will pay the most.
No, this is a massively progressive measure, Mr Speaker, that increases the floor on people's liabilities 4 times. It protects people up and down the country from catastrophic costs, which anybody can face, Mr Speaker, and everybody across the country will benefit not only in the investment in social care, in care workers, but also, of course, in making sure that we deal now and deal properly with the NHS backlogs, with the effect on our NHS, which is what I think this country wants to see.
just to say to members that we'll be running this for around an hour, so please let's try and rush on and get through it. Nicky Aiken.
Yeah. During summer recess, I spent a week looking after my father, who has advanced Alzheimer's, as my mother had a respite holiday. And I pay tribute to all those who look after their loved ones in similar circumstances and those who work in the care service. I certainly welcome the Prime Minister's statement today. Can I seek assurances that through the Health and Social Care Levy, that money raised will go to fund local authorities who do so much brilliant work in this area, as well as the NHS?
My honourable friend asked, I think, the question that everybody wants to be certain of, and absolutely, we will. This is a legally hypothecated levy, but we will ensure that the sums that are fixed for social care go to social care, and make sure that we deal with the problem of the catastrophic cost, because this will not be dispensed by the NHS. This will be dispensed by the Treasury in the normal course of government spending.
Ed Davey. Mr. Speaker, I'm a carer, and I've been a carer for most of my life. Like millions of others caring for their elderly, ill or disabled family members, I've desperately wanted a plan to fix the country's social care crisis after the Conservatives failed to implement the Lib Dem plan legislated for in 2014. But, Mr. Speaker, this isn't that plan. Where is the plan for the care staff to fill the 120,000 vacancies so there are people to provide the care? Where's the plan for working-age adult care, care for physical and learning disabled adults, the fastest-growing care challenge? Where's the plan for the crisis facing millions of unpaid family carers the Prime Minister always forgets? And what is his message to the low-paid, the young and the small business owners hit by COVID who now face his unfair tax? Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister hasn't a clue about fairness, and he just doesn't care.
I don't think, Mr. Speaker, in a long career of listening to Liberal Democrat opportunism, I don't think I've heard anything quite so absurd. He calls for more funding and then attacks the government for actually providing the wherewithal to do exactly what he wants, Mr. Speaker. And we will be ensuring, we will be spending £500 million supporting carers, 700,000 more training places, and the plan supports adult care. It supports everybody who needs care up and down the country. It is not just care for the elderly, Mr. Speaker.
Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The reform of social care has been ducked for decades because successive governments have put it in the too difficult box. So can I congratulate the Prime Minister for delivering on our commitments and his commitment, and can I ask him to ensure that, as well as the money, we integrate properly the NHS with social care so that people can get the dignity that they deserve?
Thank you very much. I want to thank my right honourable friend, because he played a major part in the gestation of these policies, and he knows them intimately, he knows them well, and he's completely right, and he's been massively encouraging to the government over the course of the last few weeks. So what we will be doing is bringing forward a white paper on the integration. And, of course, this is going to be difficult, but it's got to be done. And we must have a system whereby people can work across both the health sector and the care sector in an integrated way. We've got to have single budget holders, and we've got to make sure that, for instance, you have single electronic records in both health and social care. These are things that need to be fixed, and we need to make sure that people are cared for appropriately and in the right setting, Mr. Speaker. And that's why we're bringing forward the white paper.
Florence Session-Lund.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister will know that a number of young people are carers for their elderly residents and family members. I was a carer for my late mother, who suffered from complex needs, including sickle cell anemia and renal failure. Without those carers, a number of the issues that our local government would pick up would be more. What assessment has the Prime Minister made on the high rates of vacancies within the care sector? And will he be honest and say that this care social plan announcement has no impact in addressing that vacancy rate?
No, Mr. Speaker. I think that this plan does address the problems in the care sector, because in addition to the £6 billion we put into supporting local government with social care during the pandemic, we're putting another £500 million into supporting the care workforce. I've mentioned the 700,000 training programmes, 7,000 training places that we're investing in. But what we're also doing is trying to make sure that people who become carers, and they're wonderful people, I thank her for what she's done, get the progression, get the career structure that they need, and understand how valued and respected they are.
Thank you, Doyle Price.
Mr. Speaker, the public will welcome the certainty that's in my right honourable friend's announcement today, in particular regard to the cap and the floor. But would he agree with me that it's time we had a real informed debate about the nature of old age, now that we're all living longer? It's better for all our well-being, for the longer we can live independently, and we can all make lifestyle choices to encourage that. Will he encourage further debate about new models of care and housing models to encourage exactly that debate?
Yes, my honourable friend is completely right, and that's why one of the things that we're bringing in today, Mr. Speaker, is the Housing and the Innovation Fund, to make sure that we do care for people in the right settings, because she's completely right. There's no point in having residential care when a domiciliary option would be better, more effective, and perhaps less expensive as well. That is exactly the right approach, and the patterns of care, the way we do things, will change and will improve very rapidly, I believe.
Samuel Wilson.
Speaker. Prime Minister, I think that most people recognise that if we want more services, then we've got to pay more. But if we're going to pay, at least it should be fair. And despite your claim that this is a progressive tax, it is not. It is a flat rate tax, the benefit of which will go mostly to better off people. And therefore, those who are less well off will be subsidising those who are better off. And of course, young people and employers at a time when we're trying to create more jobs are going to feel the impact. But could I ask you, ask the Prime Minister?
To the member, he's been here a long time. I'm not responsible. I certainly don't want to be responsible for this, so we'll not use you. Prime Minister. Come on, Prime Minister. Sammy, sit down. Come on.
Thank the honourable gentleman. He's a formidable campaigner for his constituents, but I believe these measures do serve them. It is progressive. The burden falls most heavily on those who can most afford to pay, and it will help, above all, to deal with the current waiting lists in Northern Ireland, which are excessive and need to come down.
Dr. Caroline Jonson.
Outstanding during this pandemic. However, as the Prime Minister has said, there is now a large waiting list of people needing treatment. As a hospital doctor, I'm delighted to hear about the increased investment that we're getting today in the National Health Service. But as well as money, we will need staff hours, medical and nursing staff hours to reduce this waiting list. What is the government doing to increase the numbers of those medical and nursing staff?
We are recruiting massively in our NHS staff, Mr. Speaker, and I think I'm right in saying that as I stand here today, there are now 11,600 more nurses in the NHS than there were this time last year, Mr. Speaker, and we will go on and deliver on our manifesto commitment to recruit 50,000 more nurses.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having been a care worker, I know it is a hard and skilled job, one that deserves decent pay and recognition, not a Tory tax hike. Does the Prime Minister really believe his tax hike, which will fall on the shoulders of care workers, is any way to reward the heroes who have got us over the last 18 months?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, because the burdens fall overwhelmingly on those who can best afford to pay, and the benefit for care workers is not only in the increases in the living wage, but in the colossal investment that we're making in care. And that is something that will benefit not just care workers, but benefit their charges, their patients, people who need care, families who desperately need it up and down the country.
Conor Barnes.
A decade on from Dilnot, and with the demographic challenges becoming more intense, can I say to my right honourable friend that he is to be commended as the first occupant of Downing Street to grapple with this immense challenge. Some of the most distressing cases we encounter as constituency MPs are families who are caught in that tension between those in hospital ready for discharge and local authorities. You have distressed and anxious families, confused, bewildered and vulnerable people. The greatest reform we can make to this system is to put those who need the care at the very centre of our reforms.
I thank deeply my honourable friend, because I think in that intervention he summed up the heart of the issue that I was trying to explain in my statement, and it is their anxiety, the anxiety of tens of millions of families up and down the country who face this uncertainty, both about the finance but also about the proper setting for their relatives, that we are addressing today.
Jack Drabby.
Mr Speaker, the backbone of the social care system is an army of underpaid and hard-working home carers and carers. How does the Prime Minister begin to justify to them a tax rise that not only breaks a promise, but hits them hard in their pockets?
Hear, hear. Mr Speaker, because we're investing massively in that sector. We're putting £500 million into supporting care workers. We're investing in training places, 700,000 training places. But what we're also doing, Mr Speaker, is lifting the living wage by record amounts, but above all, valuing care workers, showing the respect to them and their careers that I don't believe has been properly shown before by any government.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I welcome that this proposal is going to predominantly fall on the well-off and the board's shoulders to pay for it. I know my right honourable friend has pointed out that those who are earning less than £9,500 a year won't have to pay for it, but what other mitigating factors can he do with these proposals to help those on lower incomes pay for this proposal? And could he look, once the financial conditions allow, to continue to raise the living wage and cut taxes for lower earners?
Yeah, Mr Speaker, I thank him very much, and he's right consistently to campaign in the way he does for low earners. But what we're doing here is not only increasing the threshold of which you can be liable for paying anything at all. So from where it's currently at 14,000, Mr Speaker, to 20,000, which I think is a benefit that hasn't really come out properly in the conversation. People need to understand we're lifting the minimum for which assets for which you can be liable from 14,000 to 20,000. So that helps people on low incomes. But we're also, as he knows, increasing the living wage. And I'm very pleased to see that one of the effects of the current rebound in the economy, which is something that I know he'll be studying, is that wages are now starting to rise again in exactly the way that some of us who campaigned for Brexit, Mr Speaker, wanted to see.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When I was first elected here in 1997, one of the first people that came to see me in my surgery is the wife of a man who'd been waiting 2 years for open heart surgery. And we're back there again with the waiting lists. There was no righteous indignation from the Tories when it reached 2 million before the pandemic hit. So will the Prime Minister now commit today to hitting the 18-week target for waiting lists? And will he also commit to clearing the backlog by the end of this Parliament?
Mr Speaker, I think what the Labour Party need to do is come up with any type of plan at all. Every day in this country, plan beats no plan. We are putting record investment into the NHS. We have a plan to clear the backlogs, to reduce the backlogs as fast as we possibly can. With this levy, what would they do? Answer, Mr Speaker, comes there none. They have no plan.
Neil O'Brien. Mr Speaker, for years people have come to my surgery with horror stories about the difficulties of accessing care and the frankly squalid conditions that their loved ones have to be in residential care. Can the Prime Minister reassure me that as well as protecting the things people have worked hard for all their lives, will also protect people from having to put their loved ones into conditions that not one person in this House would ever want for their loved ones?
Yes, Mr Speaker, because in addition to the caps and the floors that we're introducing to protect people from catastrophic costs, we're also introducing a fair cost of care.
Gavin Newland.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Paul Jonson of the IFS said that there were really no good arguments for using national insurance to raise these monies, and having been briefed On the government plans, care leaders are extremely disappointed, furious and depressed at the government's meagre plans on social care. But the question is, why is it necessary at all? Well, this will raise around £12 billion a year, but the Prime Minister's Brexit bonus of £350 million a week will aggregate to £18 billion a year. So where is this money, or did it never exist?
Mr. Speaker, I think the whole country understands that we have been through a pandemic that obliged the Treasury to spend £407 billion protecting people, protecting jobs and livelihoods by furlough and other measures across Scotland, and that was the right thing to do. I think people also understand that it is the reasonable and responsible thing to do now to put the NHS back on its feet with the funding it needs and sorting out social care at the same time, and that's what we're doing.
Jeremy Wright. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Isn't the starting point in this discussion that greater demand for social care is bound to require greater money to pay for it? And anyone who doesn't like these proposals needs to explain what the alternative is, which is unlikely to be clear, simple and popular. Secondly, isn't it the case that in order to create an insurance market to give people even greater reassurance about their future care costs, we need to put a cap on, and that's why the cap is most welcome? And will he do all he can to make sure that that insurance market is stimulated? And finally, will he confirm that that cap applies to those who have care needs regardless of their age?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can certainly confirm that he's right on the last point, that the cap applies regardless of age, and he's completely right in what he says about the necessity, the logical necessity for the cap if we are to have any hope of the private sector coming in with the financial instruments that will help people to protect themselves against the cost up to the limit, Mr. Speaker. That is the virtue of what we're setting out today, and what do we hear from the party opposite? Deafening silence.
Debbie Abraham.
Mr. Speaker, people living with dementia and their families have been particularly affected by the social care crisis. They represent 40% of care home residents and they pay a dementia premium of 15%. On average, they spend £30,000 a year on their care. Dementia is obviously an outcome of different diseases which are increasing. We're going to see more and more people living with dementia. So can I ask the Prime Minister if you will also fulfil his commitment from the general election manifesto for a dementia research moonshot? We know that we can, in the same way that we've developed the vaccination programme, we can develop cures and treatments for dementia.
She's quite right to focus on the issue in the way that she does. It is a very cruel lottery that the 1 in 7 face these catastrophic costs as a result of dementia, with those who have other conditions are funded in full by the NHS. And I can certainly confirm that the Moonshot programme, which was begun, one of his many moonshots, begun by my right honourable former Secretary of State for Health, it continues.
Angela Richards.
Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister confirm that this funding injection will go directly into frontline NHS services, not middle management, and that patients will be able to see the tangible benefits from it?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Not only will it go to frontline services, not only will it go to beating waiting lists, but we will make sure that this money, this massive investment, unprecedented investment, is accompanied by the reform and change and productivity gain that the NHS needs to see.
Nadia Whittam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My former colleagues, where I used to work as a care worker, sacrificed so much during the pandemic, and now under the Prime Minister's plan, their pockets will be raided with a tax that will hit hardest those who are older, young and the less well off. Does he agree that it's now time for a national care service and a wealth tax to fund it?
Mr. Speaker, the funding that we need, on the scale that we need, simply couldn't be raised in the way that she describes, or in the way that the Leader of the Opposition has vaguely indicated today. I don't think I heard a clear description of actually what he intends to do. But I can tell her that, yes, of course, we want to make sure that people in the caring profession get the support that they need, get the investment that they need, and that's why we're putting money into their training, putting money into supporting carers, but also lifting their wages with the biggest ever increase in the national living wage, and we will continue to support that.
Chris Clarkson.
Mr Speaker, can I declare an interest as the chair of the APPG on local government in thanking my right honourable friend for making the tough choices that he has today, rather than kicking the can down the road which the party opposite did for 13 years when they had the opportunity to do something. As welcome as this injection of cash is, can I ask for an assurance that it's going to be met with the same rigorous reform that's necessary to make this system viable for years to come?
Yes, I thank him for what he does and everything he does for local government, and of course we will make sure that we bring forward the white paper which shows how we intend to join up healthcare and local government in a way that they have not been since the foundation of the NHS more than 70 years ago.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister is behaving like Father Christmas, who doesn't know what he hasn't delivered in government for the last 11 years. Now, in this House last night, we had cross-party consensus in covering the cost of medicinal cannabis. So, while Father Christmas is at the dispatch box, can he deliver on a government promise to immediately set up a fund to pay for the prescriptions for medical cannabis for the children with intractable epilepsy?
I thank her, and the prescriptions that she asked for are actually already provided for on the basis of clinical advice.
Damien Green.
There's been much debate about how the money is being raised, but I think of more concern is how the money is going to be spent. My fear is that once you start spending on perfectly proper things like the NHS backlog, there will never come a point where there's enough money in this new fund to be transferred to social care that needs it now. You can't spend the same pound twice, so can my right honourable friend guarantee that the social care sector will itself see a significant uplift in its support in the immediate future?
My right honourable friend, who's done great work on this subject, and I'm indebted to him for some of the advice that he's given to me personally about how to proceed in this, and he's quite right in what he says. I think the issue is making sure that the funding does go where it's needed, but it is specifically ring-fenced, and the investments in social care will be protected by the government and by the Treasury.
Ben Bradshaw.
There are better ways of doing this, Mr Speaker, than to take money from the less well-off in work and the young to give to better-off pensioners. And can I commend to him and my own front bench the recommendations of the Joint Health and Local Government Report of 2018, agreed unanimously by all members of all parties in this House, which would deliver a system that is sustainable, equitable, address poor quality and low pay, and allow the proper integration of health and social care, none of which, from what I've heard today, his proposals would deliver.
Mr Speaker, time and again, Labour members have stood up and said that there's a better way to do this without offering a single idea. Mr Speaker, a plan beats no plan, Mr Speaker.
David Jones.
Mr Speaker, can my right honourable friend confirm that the sums passed to Wales under his proposals will not only be ring-fenced for health and social care, but also that the Welsh Government will be required to apply the same £86,000 cap as will be applied in England? It would be grossly unfair if care users in one part of the country were to be worse off than those in another.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very, very important point, and I think members across the House will know that the lower limit in Scotland is, I think, £12,500 at the moment. We're in lifting that to 20,000 as we are now. That's, I think, is something that people in Scotland may want to address, and I certainly think that in Wales the cap of £86,000 is something that people in Wales will want to see as well. So I think there is a strong benefit for the whole of the UK proceeding as one.
Dr. Lucid Cameron.
Many thanks, Mr Speaker. As chair of the Health All-Party Group, I've been hearing concerns from older adults from across the United Kingdom who are in social care and also in the community who have experienced loneliness, anxiety, isolation from loved ones, illness, bereavement and loss. The British Journal of Psychiatry have today documented a significant rise in depression in this group. So will the Prime Minister commit to ensuring that older adults in social care and the community have access to adequate mental health services and that those are fully funded?
She's completely right to draw attention to the suffering of people throughout the pandemic, particularly in care homes, the mental stress that they've suffered as a result of not being able to see or hold loved ones in the normal way. And it has been one of the most appalling features of this pandemic. And we're certainly investing record sums in mental health to deal with that issue and many others.
The Prime Minister share my disbelief at the Leader of the Opposition's response to his statement in considering that waiting times for treatment and discharging for my constituents in Wales are much longer than they are in England. And can he confirm that Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland will be net gainers out of the social care levy? And will he further guarantee that the additional sums available will be spent on health and social care in the nations?
Well, I can certainly confirm, Mr. Speaker, that both Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland will be getting an increment. There will be a union dividend in the way that I described, but clearly it is up to those parts of the country to ensure that that money is spent on the people's priorities. And I believe the people's priorities are health and social care.
Corinne Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As well as the 30,000 beds the Prime Minister talked about, we know there's been a 36% increase in people dying at home through the pandemic in circumstances we know not much about. The mental, physical and financial torture and cost borne by families is unknown and I think will shock many of us when we hear from our constituents. He may be flying a kite today, but I do think he's breaching a dam, and that is something we all need to grasp. Targeted help is not a long-term solution. My friend from Exeter quite rightly highlights what possibly could be, but there is some certainty offered today. Can he clarify, is he going to bring forward a white paper? Is he going to bring forward different forms of legislation? How are we going to understand the impact?
I thank her very much, and we're setting out the plan today on the caps, on the floors, on how to deal with social care. We're setting out the plan on nurses' pay. On dealing with the backlogs. But what we will also be doing is setting out the finer detail of the integration between health and social care in the ways that I've described, making sure that everybody has electronic records, both for health and for social care, that there can be movement between the two services. Community nurses and adult social carers should not be doing these radically different professions with different pay spines. There should be an integration, and people should be having care in the appropriate setting, and there should be a single budget holder. Those are some of the things that we'll be discussing in the White Paper.
Ron Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, additional investment is welcome, but that has to come with assurance. Now, for my constituents in Tipton at the moment, who, because of the party opposite, are getting turfed out of their care home, despite a £2 million underspend by Sandwell Council on adult social care, can my right honourable friend assure my constituents in Tipton that their campaign to save Walker Grange Care Home isn't in vain? He'll ensure the assurance comes with this to stop the party opposite turfing out some of the most vulnerable people in my community.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I think he speaks to the profound indifference of the Labour Party to this issue for decades. And that's why we're taking the decisive action that we are to address the problems in the whole social care system, to support care homes and to support those who must face the cost of social care.
Very sharp.
Speaker, will the Prime Minister agree with me that any new money must go alongside reform of our NHS? And will you agree that we have a system where most people's entry into the health system is through a GP? And it surely can't be right that in many of the most deprived communities in our country, for love and all money, you cannot get a GP. And there must be something wrong. In many parts of our country, in this day and age, you can't get a GP, you can't even get a dentist. When can we do something about to change that?
He is entirely right in what he says, and in the sense that we're doing another 50 million more GP appointments, so that's part of our manifesto pledge. But what we're also going to do as part of these reforms, because I don't think anybody wants to see money just funneled into the NHS without reform. We're also going to look at GP contracts to make sure they see the right patients at the right time.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, if there was an easy solution to the problem of social care, it would have happened years, if not decades ago. And I believe that everybody in this House, perhaps particularly from parties with no alternatives, should welcome the way in which the Prime Minister is tackling health and social care together with a hypothecated tax that means this health and social care levy is ring-fenced for all our constituents' benefit. On the issue of intergenerational fairness, could my right honourable friend confirm that when he said that the recently retired working would contribute and the lowest earnings won't contribute, will he encourage the Health Secretary to lay out the details of the tapers as soon as possible so that everyone can see this is a progressive levy?
Yes, my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will certainly be laying that out. But I think what everybody understands in the country, there's no intergenerational issue here, because in the end, all families are affected by this. Everybody has older relatives for whom we love and whose care, the cost of whose care makes us anxious. Everybody understands that families across the country are liable for this, and we must take steps to fix it, and that's what we're doing.
From West.
Mr. Speaker, confidence in job creation is crucial right now in our economy. What assessment has the Prime Minister made of the number of jobs where employers will look at those extra national insurance contributions and say, no, I don't think I will take on those extra staff?
40% of companies won't be affected at all by this. She should remember, and she should also. I'm sure she also knows that the labour market at the moment is so buoyant, Mr. Speaker, that not only are there huge numbers of vacancies, but wages are rising, and that is a good thing, Mr. Speaker.
During the pandemic, the government stepped in to save lives and jobs. In Rutland and Melton, 47% of jobs would have been lost without the efforts. So would he agree with me that it would be wrong to meet the cost with higher borrowing and debt, which will be carried by our children, but also will he commit to look at those councils who are worse funded, specifically Leicestershire and Rutland, who need real help with social care above and beyond a generic formula across the country?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I thank for what she's saying about Melton and Rutland. We will certainly make sure that they get the funding that they need. But she's hit on the fundamental point. Borrowing is, in the end, borrowing more is no answer. We're borrowing a lot, Mr. Speaker, and in the end, borrowing is just future tax rises for younger people or people even unborn, and that is not what this government is going to do.
Richard Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Health and social care do need massive investment, especially after Tory austerity has so undermined our National Health Service over the last 11 years. But a 10% tax on the wealth of those with over £100 million would raise £69 billion. So surely a wealth tax is how we should be funding these vital services. But isn't the truth, Mr. Speaker, despite the rhetoric and the promises, the Tories don't have the guts to take on the super rich who fund their party, and that's why they won't back a wealth tax?
Mr. Speaker, I thank him for his contribution. At least he has the guts, unlike the leader of his party, to say that he would tax people in this country to the tune of 12 or 13 billion pounds a year to pay for this. This is a wealth tax on that scale. We believe that this is the right way. What we haven't heard from the Labour front bench is any credible alternative.
Andrew Bally.
Will my right honourable friend confirm that as a result of this announcement today, the Scottish National Health Service will receive billions of extra pounds in funding? And does he share my astonishment, and I'm sure the astonishment of the people of Scotland, at the remarkable reaction of the SNP today, who it seems to be, because they haven't asked for it, they don't want Scotland's NHS to get this extra funding?
Mr. Speaker, brilliantly and succinctly put, Mr. Speaker. Do they want the money or not? Do the people of Scotland want the investment in their healthcare and social care or not? There's more money coming for Scotland, Mr. Speaker. Let's hope they spend it wisely.
Madeira Wilson.
Much, Mr. Speaker. A little over 2 years ago, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and promised the nation an oven-ready deal on social care. Yet today's announcement of a tax on jobs only promises a plan later this year, and crucially, the detail here says only people starting care after October 2023 will be helped with those catastrophic costs. So what does the Prime Minister say today to the 1.5 million people who are missing out on care and to the millions of hard-working families facing crippling costs between now and September 2023, but paying for it from April next year?
What I say to her is that, frankly, she should take that up with the former leaders of the Labour Party, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and all the ministers responsible. who did absolutely nothing to fix the problem when they were in office, because it's this government that's dealing with it now.
Mark up.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister was absolutely right to focus on the importance of the social care workforce. Unfortunately, the government's own estimate is that due to our compulsory vaccination measures, 40,000 people in that care home workforce will leave the sector by November of this year. In his plan, are there urgent measures that the government's going to take to ensure we can replace those missing care workers, to ensure we deliver high-quality care, as I think everyone in this House wants to see?
My right honourable friend makes a very important point about compulsory vaccination. I believe it's the right thing, and we're making sure that we encourage more people to join the social care workforce in the ways that I've described today, with the £500 million investment, with the training places. But I think what we also have to understand is that many of those social care workers are leaving to join the NHS, where currently vaccination is not compulsory, and there are almost 10% of NHS frontline workers who are not vaccinated. And I think that that is something on which we need to reflect, and that's why it's right that we're having a consultation on the way forward for the NHS. Well, Mr. Speaker, speaking for myself, I don't think it's right that almost 1 in 10 of NHS workers should be, frontline NHS workers, should be currently unvaccinated against COVID.
Speaker, it is telling that in the Prime Minister's statement there was not a single word of tribute to our extraordinary social care workforce, or any mention of the pay increase they so desperately need, many of whom are the same social care workers who are in low pay, who will face a £1,000 cut in their income as a consequence of the Prime Minister's cut to universal credit, on top of the national insurance increase they now face as well. What has the Prime Minister got to say to our dedicated social care workforce who spend their time caring for our precious loved ones every single day?
Mr. Speaker, let me say again what I've said repeatedly, that the social care workforce of this country have done an amazing job, continue to do an amazing job throughout the pandemic and before and beyond. And I met more of them today. And what they're getting from this package of measures is not only investment in their careers and their progression, but I believe the long-term structure and respect that they need as a profession, and the prospect of integration between what they do and what the NHS provides. And that is a massive prize.
I congratulate my right honourable friend for grasping an issue that his predecessors have been ducking for decades. Does he agree with me that what's been announced today restores some equity to a system that relies upon pooling our risk, and in particular people that have been excluded with dementia, neurodegenerative disease, Parkinson's disease and the general frailty of old age and their relatives can now look forward with some confidence to the system that has been there for others also applying to them?
My honourable friend knows exactly what he's talking about, because he's, of course, a former GP, and he's seen these issues at the front line. And what we're doing with this measure is not only investing in care and in the NHS, but we're bringing the magic of averages to the rescue of millions.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before the pandemic, the Conservative-led local government associations said there was a gap in social care funding and local authority funding of around £5 billion. It's got worse since. So will the Prime Minister state very clearly, of the £36 billion to be raised through this addition to national insurance contributions in the next 3 years, how much of that £36 billion will go to local authorities to fund social care? And when he brings the cap and floor system in 2023, that will mean less money coming in from people's own funding. So what will the net addition be for local authorities of the increase in the national insurance payments and the reduction in payments from the cap and floor system?
Making an exceptionally important point, but I could, in addition to the £6 billion that we put into supporting local government throughout the pandemic, we're now putting more in precisely to support social care. What will happen is that will ramp up over time as the system kicks in, but the distribution will be set out in due course by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nobody in this House, and I doubt in the country, will be surprised that the Prime Minister has the guts to take on reforming social care when none of his predecessors did so. But I was amazed, Mr. Speaker, that in the Prime Minister's statement he pointed out that roughly 1 in 3 hospital beds are occupied by people who could be better treated and cared for elsewhere. But it seems to me, Mr. Speaker, from my surgeries, that the problem is largely due to the local government and health service not working together on this. And when can we see some improvement in that?
My honourable friend is completely right, and I'm sure he speaks for members across the House who are experiencing exactly this kind of problem for years in our surgeries. There is a mismatch between health and social care. There isn't a proper system for deciding where people should be treated for their own benefit, with the result that we get these huge pressures of delayed discharge, which make it more difficult to deal with the elective surgery that people need, particularly now. That's why we've got to do both things at once, and that's why we're doing what we're doing.
Thank you, Dave Begley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable members for Ashford, Cities of Westminster and Sheffield South East have hit the nail on the head. There is no plan for social care. What the Prime Minister has listed is money to go into the NHS. So can he tell us now, when will the money go to local authorities so that it will actually go to those social care providers, domiciliary and residential, that actually need it?
It's all in the plan, Mr. Speaker, and the funding, the overwhelming bulk of the funding begins with support for frontline NHS electives, for nurses' pay, for vaccines, and then as the social care plan ramps up, the ratio changes, but it will be being set out by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health.
Kevin Hollinwood.
For a recent report, a joint select committee report, Health and Local Government, on the future funding of social care, which I sat upon, together with 12 members of opposition parties, it says, we therefore recommend that an earmarked contribution described as a social care premium should be introduced, to which individuals and employers should contribute. This can either be an addition to national insurance or through a separate mechanism. Does that not show there is cross-party support for this kind of proposal? And the objections of the opposition are simply political opportunism.
Can I just thank my honourable friend for making that very elegant but very telling point about the cross-party support that there should be on this issue, Mr. Speaker. What we're trying to do is create the conditions by government action, by decisive government action, for exactly the kind of insurance systems that I know my right honourable friend wants to see.
Dr. Rupert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a long time coming, but this is too little too late for the 34,000 people who have died of COVID with dementia. Can he tell us now when he will honour his manifesto pledge to double research spending into this cruel disease which took my mum? It was isolating before COVID. Or is this just another one going the same way as the money for the NHS promised on the side of the bus?
I'm very sorry to hear about the suffering of her mother, and dementia is a very cruel affliction, and it's because of the cruelty of that lottery about who gets it and who doesn't that we're putting in the measures that we are, but we're also funding extra research into dementia, and my right honourable friend the Health Secretary is determined to ensure that we continue to with the moonshot that I was referring to earlier.
Speaker, can I ask the Prime Minister why he decided to reject other forms
of insurance as a model. The Germans brought in an insurance model back in the 80s, facing the same problems that we had. It relies on the private insurance sector, and the noble Lord Lilly from the other place has brought forward a bill which would see the government set up a state insurer. Those retired householders would then pay a premium which would be fixed as a charge, and then that charge would only be paid upon the death of that individual. Don't those models do a little more to intergenerational fairness?
I thank my honourable friend for his thoughtful question, and we looked at all these models, of course, Mr. Speaker, as you can imagine. And I think that the problem is we need to go for an insurance system that works and has a genuine chance of being set up. And the only way of encouraging the financial services industry to come in and offer products, whether they're insurance or annuities or whatever, is to take away that risk of catastrophic costs. And that's a very substantial risk for too many people. It means that the insurance market hasn't been able to develop. We believe that this is the best way forward for the country.
Drew Hendrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend referred to comments by IFS Director Paul Jonson earlier, but Paul Jonson also said he's bemused as to why such a bad tax policy instrument has to be used, and pointed out that the under-50s would pay 2/3 of the cost of social care if they paid through NI. Prime Minister, that means young people and the lowest paid bearing the brunt, many of these also working with universal credit, people in Scotland paying that and elsewhere. Does he think it's fair to progress this whilst also cutting the £20 a week from hard-pressed families on universal credit?
No, Mr. Speaker, obviously older people continue to pay the levy, and the richest 14% pay half the cost of this transformation, and that's entirely the right thing to do.
Christopher Cho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If there hadn't been a pandemic, how would we have funded this reform of social care without having to raise taxes?
Mr. Speaker, the pandemic and the cost of the pandemic have impacted both our health and our social care systems. As I've explained tried to explain to the House today, they are intimately related. The best way to put them on a sound footing, both of them on a sound footing for the future, is to treat them together, to put in the levy in the way that we are.
Alex Cunningham.
Much, Mr. Speaker. We all know that the Prime Minister's promises are a wee bit dodgy. Today he promised his extra taxes will go to the front line. So by how much will he increase the pay for people in the social care profession, or is it just going to be another round of applause?
People in the social care profession are not paid by the government, as he knows, overwhelmingly, but they are the beneficiaries of the living wage, which the government has increased by record amounts. And what we are doing is investing in their training, investing in their careers, and making sure they get the respect and the progression that they need.
Well, Stride.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the devil, as ever, will be in the detail. However, could I broadly welcome initially these proposals, particularly compared to what we were expecting, which was a rise across national insurance as it stands at the moment. This is a much broader based levy. It's including those who have retired, and it's also including those who are receiving dividends. And that has a very welcome consequence, it seems to me, Mr. Speaker, that the broadest shoulders will pay the most. But could my right honourable friend also address one of the criticisms of what we feared might have been brought forward today, which was the impact on the young in particular, and this issue of intergenerational fairness, and how he feels that this approach is going to be useful in that respect.
Can I thank my right honourable friend very, very much for his support, because it is extremely important, and I think he's completely right. What we're trying to do is to make sure that those who can pay the most do pay the most. We're trying to make sure that we address the issue of intergenerational fairness, but there's a bigger point which I've made repeatedly. This is not something that simply affects one generation, the elderly. There are huge numbers of younger people in care who will benefit from what we are doing. Huge numbers of younger people in care who will benefit, and every person in this country has relatives who face the problems that we are trying now to allay or to defeat.
Blomfield.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister today was supposed to be announcing a social care plan, but there was no vision, no detail, and no real sense of understanding the complex web of issues which create the social care crisis. In particular, he made no mention of the millions of unpaid carers whose commitment to their loved ones props up the failing system. So will he now say very specifically what is in his plan to identify and support unpaid carers, and particularly young carers, and what resources will he commit to them?
What unpaid care, and I thank unpaid carers for everything that they do, and he's quite right to point out the huge contribution that they make. But what they have now is the certainty that if they need to pay for the cost of care in some way or other, then there will be a limit. There will be a limit, and they will not have to continue with their unpaid exertions, with their care and love forever, because the government is coming in to help them.
Jonathan Gillis.
Thank you, Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's investment into the NHS, particularly into the beds, which have obviously clogged up. And we see this in Stoke-on-Trent, where the Royal Stoke University Hospital, built under the last Labour government with a disastrous PFI debt that steals £20 million a year from the front line, and with 200 fewer beds in it than the previous hospital. So can my right honourable friend ensure that areas like Stoke-on-Trent, previously forgotten areas like Stoke-on-Trent, will get to their fair share of funding?
Mr. Speaker, that is exactly the PFI contracts, the endless borrowing that Labour instituted. Hospitals up and down the country are paying the price for the type of approach advocated by the last Labour government, the completely financially reckless and incompetent approach. That is the opposite of what this government is doing. We are taking the fiscally responsible, reasonable and right approach to fixing this problem.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said at the dispatch box, though it's not in the printed copy of his speech, that the NHS backlog that we face will get worse before it gets better. How much worse?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it would be a great thing if the Labour Party would support what we're doing with the package we've brought forward. We'll be able to fix that backlog even faster. If the right honourable gentleman, the leader of the Labour, we didn't hear from him, by the way, whether he's going to vote for these proposals or not. As usual, a great vacuum at the heart of the Labour Party, Mr. Speaker. Does he actually support these proposals? Yes or no? That's what I'd like to know.
Stephen Crabb.
I think the Prime Minister and the Chancellor and the Health Secretary deserve enormous credit for coming together and working out a plan to this incredibly difficult problem. And I think people outside this place will recognise that. But does the Prime Minister agree with me that one of the most difficult parts of this challenge is ensuring that we bring out the very best now in our NHS, that we bear down on unnecessary costs, we increase quality output from the NHS, and that's the key to freeing up that extra resource to get to the front line of social care?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we cannot simply continue to funnel huge sums into the NHS without getting the productivity gains that I know that everybody wants to see around the country. Of course, we want to value our frontline NHS workers. That's why we put up the wages of nurses. It's why we're increasing salaries and recruiting many, many more. But we must see the gains in efficiency that go with the investment that we're making. We're investing record sums, and we also need to see improvements in the NHS service as well.
Brennan Fellows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Cabinet ministers, Tory backbenchers and lords, businesses large and small, all opposed to this proposal. Universal criticism and how it will affect young people and those who are less well off, who are working. And to top it all, the Prime Minister can't resist interfering in the devolved settlement, even though Scotland voted for a majority of independent supporting SPs. How long, Mr. Speaker, does this Prime Minister think he can carry on like this before he follows on the footsteps of the right honourable member for Maidenhead and loses his majority due to a botched plan?
Right. Well, Mr. Speaker, I leave it to her to speculate on that time. But I think it's very, very bizarre that yet again the Scottish nationalists, if I think she's a Scottish nationalist, seem to be rejecting the union dividend that this produces. I hope, and I think the people of Scotland deserve this money to be spent on health and social care in Scotland. Let's hope that it is so spent.
Joy Morrissey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many in this House have discussed the burden placed on councils, and may I echo the concerns that this money be ring-fenced for the local authorities who take the lion's share of the burden for adult social care? And could there be greater assurances from the government as to where those funding streams will be safeguarded and directed toward local authorities?
My honourable friend is spot on, and the Secretary of State for Health will be setting out a bit later on exactly how we will ensure that local councils get the support that they need.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister failed to say a word about the broken private care market that fleeces the frail and suppresses the wages of the workers. Exactly. Why has he failed to lay out plans to end this broken market and introduce a public national care system?
What we're doing, well, I know that the Labour Party wants to nationalise everything, but actually, which I think would be typically insane, since the vast majority of care is provided by the private sector, Mr. Speaker. But what we are doing is lifting people's wages with the national living wage. We're investing in training. We're putting £500 million into a progression of the caring workforce. But what we'll also do, Mr. Speaker, is make sure that local councils get the funding they need to support a fair cost of care.
Well,
thank you, Mr. Speaker. When people can't get an appointment with their GP, they often turn to hospital A&E departments, or they miss out on early intervention that places greater pressure on our health system further down the line. As part of his plan for the NHS to recover, will the Prime Minister make sure that everybody can get face-to-face appointments with their GP without further delay?
My honourable friend is completely right, and I know he speaks for colleagues across the House. We need to reform the system so that GPs see the right people at the right time and in the right numbers.
Alison Cooper.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The FSB's Mike Cherry has said that these plans unquestionably mean fewer jobs and economic damage, and that they are devastating for businesses trying to get back on their feet. So can I ask the Prime Minister, why is he intent in damaging the very fragile recovery we've had for the past year?
Mr Speaker, I disagree vehemently with what the Honourable Lady has said, because if you look at what is happening, the economy is coming back much more strongly than many people predicted, including the OBR, and that is, I think, a good thing. If we'd followed the advice of the party opposite, we'd still be in lockdown, but we're seeing growth returning, we're seeing jobs being created, and I don't believe that anything in this plan will do anything to dent that confidence. On the contrary, businesses want to know. Businesses want to know that their workforce has the security of a good health and social care plan to back them up, and that's what this government is providing.
Richard Drax.
Mr Speaker, as Conservatives, broken pledges and tax rises should concern us. Our finances are in a perilous state. Surely a radical review of the NHS is needed if this money is not going to disappear into another black hole. Does my right friend agree with me that the Conservative way to raise revenue is to lower taxes, not raise them?
I do agree with that general proposition, Mr Speaker, but in the current circumstances, after 18 months of in which it's been necessary for the government to perform the most enormous fiscal exertions to put its arms round the country at a very, very difficult and dangerous time. I think it is right that we take the steps that we are to put the NHS back on a sustainable footing and to deal with the problems of social care, which make long-term solutions for the NHS, the very reform that he and I want to see, so difficult to achieve.
Andrew Gwynn.
Words I never thought I'd say, but the Prime Minister is right. You can't fix the NHS without fixing social care. But you can't fix social care without fixing local government. And of course, in the lifetime of this government, £15 billion has been taken out of council budgets, disproportionately hitting some of the least affluent parts of England and impacting on social care outcomes. Councils need assurances and clarity that funding will follow, when they'll get it and how much it will be now. Does he understand that?
Naturally, Mr Speaker, the last few years have seen record increases in local council spending power. We've continued to support councils throughout the pandemic, but my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, will be setting out how we propose to support local government in going forward with the fair cost of care. But in the meantime, can I thank him for his unprecedented support for these measures.
David Morris.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, in the past 18 months during lockdown, I can probably say to the House that I've seen more of the NHS than most people. I've had a neck operation, my baby was born, my back exploded, for want of a better word, and I was paralysed. And I'd like to go on record and thank the RLI for getting me walking again and looking after me and my family. But what I'm listening, and I'm saying this with collegiate sense to everybody, what the Prime Minister has done here is what Andy Burnham wanted to do 10 years ago but never brought it through when he was the last Health Secretary for Labour and the Shadow Secretary. And it's brave what you're doing, Prime Minister, but I can tell you now, when I knock on doors in my constituency, I've been saying for years, put an extra penny on taxation for the NHS, and everyone's agreed with me. So whatever these tax rises are going to be, so be it. We have to protect the NHS. It's our moral duty. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you. Can I just say to my honourable friend how wonderful it is to see him looking so well, and I echo his thanks to our healthcare professionals for everything that they do. I do believe that it is the fixed view of the British people that after a very difficult time, it is the fiscally right and responsible thing to do to protect frontline healthcare, to support the NHS, but also at the same time to fix these underlying problems, of which social care is just one.
Jim Sharp.
Mr Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for bringing this forward to address NHS and social care, long overdue. Across the United Kingdom and in my constituency of Strangford, small and medium businesses are critically important to provide jobs and to boost the economy. Can the Prime Minister assure this House that across the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, small and medium businesses will not shoulder the burden as they can little afford it? Thank you.
Mr Speaker, I'm a fervent admirer of the businesses of Northern Ireland, their ingenuity, their ability to innovate, which I've seen many times first hand. I know that they're capable of a very, very dynamic recovery, and indeed I believe that is going on right now, and I have every confidence in my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, to keep bringing forward those business-friendly supply-side measures which will drive a very, very strong economic recovery.
Liam Fox.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend's commitment to improve and raise NHS capacity? For decades, bed occupancy rates in the NHS have been kept too high in the name of efficiency, but at the expense of resilience. When it comes to reforming long-term care, we need a clear set of principles to be followed. We need to encourage and make it worthwhile for people to save for a rainy day. We need to support families to look after their loved ones, and we must allow enough to pass down the generations to make it worthwhile saving in the first place. Can my right honourable friend reassure us that his proposed reforms will meet these tests?
Yes, Mr Speaker, I thank him very much for his support and he knows a great deal about this subject from many of the professions or many points of view. But it is certainly the right thing to do to bring in the measures that will help to create a private sector market for support in the way that I've described, but also more fundamentally from our point of view, Mr Speaker, or his and my point of view, these are measures that support thrift, that support people who save, that support people who do the right thing, who pay off their mortgage, who work hard all their lives to build up something for their families and for their descendants. So I think these measures are profoundly in the interest of the people of this country.
Flynn.
Let's be clear. Scottish taxpayers are being asked to bail out England's failing social care system, a mess created by the UK government opposite. So can I ask the Prime Minister, in all good sincerity, does he believe that his new poll tax will help or hinder the cause of Scottish independence?
Good luck with that one, Mr. Speaker. That's all I can say to him, because what the people of Scotland are getting, what the people of Scotland and the whole of the UK are getting is £2.2 billion more across the whole of the DAs, and a £300 million union dividend. A £300 million union. And if they don't want to spend it, if they don't want to spend it on health and social care, Mr. Speaker, they don't want to spend it at all, then why don't he, if he's handing this money back, Mr. Speaker, then let's hear it from the Scottish Nationalist Party. Do they want it or don't they?
Marcus Fish.
Speaker, will my right honourable friend work with me to examine ways that I can see of getting the finance, the technology and the political sectors together to actually do this in a way that can be less of a burden on the taxpayer?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I thank him, and I've been reading some of his brilliant contributions on WhatsApp groups, Mr. Speaker, about this issue, and I share his idealism about the ways in which the private sector, financial services industry can now take advantage of what we're doing, help ordinary people up and down the country to protect themselves in exactly the way that he describes. And I know that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, would very much welcome his help as we work towards the White Paper.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And could I thank the Prime Minister for at least providing clarity that any reference to union dividends simply refers to devolved nations getting their taxes that they pay back and having the balance filled up with UK borrowing. But in its belated attempts to tackle England's social care crisis, with hedge fund owners to the left of him and millionaire property owners to the right, can the Prime Minister explain what it was that persuaded him to embed the advantages of inherited wealth and privilege and instead shift the burden for paying for this policy onto the lowest earnings and the youngest in society with the least amount of assets?
I don't think there's anything much inherited either left, right or in the middle of this particular trio, Mr. Speaker. But again, what I find extraordinary is that the Scottish Nationalist Party would rather not have the union dividend that this programme produces, and I think what the people of Scotland need to do is look at what is now being offered in terms of raising the thresholds for protection, helping people across the UK, and I hope that we can all, Mr. Speaker, move forward together.
Final question, Stephen Howard.
Mr. Speaker, can I commend my right honourable friend for keeping a promise that he made on the first day of his premiership, and the frankness about the difficulties of funding the challenges. There will be millions of hard-working families today looking at his proposals for the cap and floor and welcoming them. So with regard to the cap, could he confirm that it will cover all types of care, residential, domiciliary? And will he confirm that within that, given there's likely to be the need for more workers and care workers, that there will be up to 500 million as a training fund inside the levy?
I thank my right honourable friend, and he knows a great deal about this issue and the pressures that the sector faces. So I can tell him that yes, of course, it covers both residential and domiciliary, and yes, there is a £500 million fund to help the caring profession, and 700,000 training places that we will provide as a direct result of what we're doing today.
We now come to the statement from the Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the statement just made by my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, on a sustainable plan for the NHS and social care, I should like to make a short business statement regarding business for tomorrow and the rest of the week. The business for tomorrow will now be Wednesday, the 8th of September, consideration of a Ways and Means resolution on health and social care levy. Thursday, the 9th of September, a motion relating to the second report of session 2021-22 from the Committee on Standards, followed by the remaining stages of the Rating, Coronavirus and Directors' Disqualification Dissolved Companies Bill, followed by a general debate on the legacy of Joe Cox. The subject for this debate was determined by the Backbench Business Committee. On Friday, the 10th of September, will be private members' bills. As usual, I will make a business statement on Thursday.
Shadow Leader of the House, Thangam Debonair.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Leader for advance sight of the statement.
So, this morning, Cabinet was bounced into the Prime Minister's so-called social care plan, and now the Leader is trying to bounce Parliament into accepting it in a vote tomorrow. This is no way to run a government. It's no way to run a country. This Tory tax rise won't come in till next spring, so why the rush? Does he know that he will never get it past his backbenchers through Parliament? Otherwise, is he making sure that his own MPs have as little time as possible to consult their constituents or hear from stakeholders and experts? He would not be the first minister in his government to forget that emails will be coming into his colleagues' inboxes right now. The Leader recently reminded the Prime Minister of the fate of one-term President George H.W. Bush and his words on taxes. But his words were not heeded. So will the Leader be voting against his government tomorrow, or was it another example of more empty rhetoric? This government, Madam Deputy Speaker, is in crisis management mode, lurching from one disaster to the next. They're trying to cover up the fact they don't actually have a plan. They only have a tax rise. The haste in this vote is to cover up a litany of broken promises and failures. There is nothing for carers. There is nothing to help people to stay living in their own homes. There's nothing to help the council funding shortfall that successive Tory governments have caused. The Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street 2 years, 1 month and 14 days ago, vowing to fix the crisis in social care once and for all with a clear plan that was prepared. But here we aren't. This is not a clear plan. It does not seem very prepared. This was just an attempt to fix an NHS funding gap that this government actually caused and successive Tory governments before them. So, now we've been waiting for more than 2 years. Why the sudden haste? Today, we see why they just want to rush it through without proper consultation. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Leader of the House.
Madam Deputy Speaker, that was a fine example of sound and fury which signifieth nothing. It is entirely routine for matters to be brought before the House in this way, that whenever a budget comes forward, the budget statements, the budget resolutions may be voted on that very evening. It has always been the case that matters relating to taxation are dealt with swiftly, because it is important to ensure that people aren't able to take forestalling measures and so forth that become possible if taxation is not dealt with properly. Tomorrow is in fact dealing with the standing orders of this House, which require a Ways and Means resolution to be brought forward before legislation may be brought forward. The legislation will be brought forward in due course, and I will announce it at a business statement. All of this is completely routine and standard. And I'm afraid the more the Labour Party says that there is no plan, when a plan has been published, when a plan has been detailed by the Prime Minister, when a plan has been announced to the world, shows merely the vacuity of the opposition, an opposition that learns nothing and remembers nothing.
Giving another statement to the House. It's 2 in 2 days, I think, and he's been one of the most active Prime Ministers in Parliament. But on the specific business statement, could the Leader of the House give us an assurance on the length of time for this debate? I welcome the early debate, but I want to ensure there's enough time for members to get in. So has he any view on the length of this debate?
Speaker, the House may be surprised that in the absence of call lists, it's much harder to plant questions. But had it been possible to plant a question, my honourable friend's one is extraordinarily useful, because I am pleased to be able to tell the House that the whole of tomorrow will be available for the Ways and Means resolution, subject, of course, to urgent questions at the discretion of Mr Speaker and statements that may prove necessary.
Person Pete Wishart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Leader of the House for that very short statement? And we're getting this all everything is normal and as it should be tone from the Leader of the House, even though he knows that nothing is normal about what he's doing tomorrow. And I'm sure the Leader of the House is absolutely thrilled that the very thing he's profoundly opposing will be debated and voted on tomorrow. And I remember over the weekend, read his lips, no more taxes. And he's right, people did remember those words, as they will remember them again. Maybe we could see these defiant lips move in accordance with a matter of principle for him and see him actually voting against these measures when he comes before the House. But I'm wondering, and it's following on from the Honourable Gentleman's question, is one day enough for all of this? Because we need to hear from the countless Tory members of Parliament apologising to their constituents for breaking their manifesto pledge not to raise tax, VAT or national insurance. And we particularly want to hear from all the red wall Tories who are now going to have to explain to all these new voters that they will now have to swallow this regressive move and how that will impact on them. And we will want to hear from Scotland, as we will be invited to pay twice for their social care mess for services that we have already legislated on. All I can say to the Leader of the House, these lips were made for talking.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One had noticed that the honourable gentleman's lips were made for talking. It has done a great deal, and usually to the great entertainment of the House. Though I am delighted, flattered, thrilled by so many people reading my comments in the Sunday Express. I do a weekly wisdom for them. As my wife points out to me, being wise once a week is probably as much as can be expected of me. But nonetheless, I provide these comments for the Sunday Express, and I hope that people will carry on reading that estimable newspaper and getting my wisdom on a weekly basis. The time allowed tomorrow is going to be sufficient, and there will, of course, be legislation brought forward, as I said. And tomorrow, I'm sure the honourable gentleman is right. Many Conservative MPs will want to wax lyrical on the advantages to the United Kingdom of this proposal that will see a £300 million union dividend and will help bail out the failings of the Scottish National Health System, so badly run by the nationalist government in Edinburgh, that extra money will be going to Scotland, and Scotland will receive more money than Scottish people pay in taxation, or to be more accurate, than Scottish residents pay in taxation. So it is a benefit to Scotland, and I might remind the honourable gentleman about gift horses not being looked in the mouth.
Sir Desmond Swain.
I've received, Madam Deputy Speaker, a brace of emails asking me to be here on Thursday to vote against COVID passports. Is the Leader sure there's something he hasn't told us?
Leader of the House.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not entirely sure who my right honourable friend receives his emails from. It may be from certain conspiracy theorists who think that there are all sorts of things going to be discussed in this House, but I would remind him what I said for Thursday. There will be a motion relating to the second report of the session 2021-22 from the Committee on Standards. It will be followed by the remaining stages of the rating, coronavirus and directors' disqualification dissolved companies bill, and then the very important general debate on the legacy of Joe Cox. If he wishes to be earlier in the morning, he can, of course, hear my business statement, which will update him on any further business.
Sir Christopher Chope.
Madam Deputy Speaker, will the Ways and Means resolution be amendable? And in particular, would it be possible to amend the Ways and Means resolution to ensure that there's the cap on care costs comes into effect the same time as the higher taxes, instead of 18 months later?
Leader of the House.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Ways and Means resolutions are amendable, but my right honourable friend will have to have a discussion with the Table Office as to what type of amendments they will accept. But yes, the broad principle is that they are amendable.
I thank the Leader of the House for his statement. Statement, Secretary of State Therese Coffey.
Thank you. With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll make a statement on the annual uprating of state pensions and survivors' benefits in industrial benefit. Each year, as the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, I'm required to undertake a review of certain benefit and pension rates in relation to the general level of earnings. And just as happened last year, this year I anticipate an unusual change in earnings due to the effects of the COVID pandemic. The unprecedented but necessary COVID restrictions we introduced last year protected lives, especially the most vulnerable, many of whom are pensioners, and protected the NHS. But these restrictions caused disruption to the economy, including preventing many people from working, wages falling, and sadly many people being made redundant. As we sought to protect lives, so we sought to protect livelihoods, and to mitigate the worst impacts, we introduced a £407 billion package of support, including the furlough and self-employment schemes to support incomes. Nevertheless, last year we saw earnings fall by 1 percentage point. In response, we legislated to set aside the earnings link, allowing me to award an uprating of 2.5%, as this was higher than inflation. If we had not done this, state pension would have been frozen. Thanks to our vaccination programme, which started with the eldest and most vulnerable in our society, we have seen that as the economy and businesses have reopened and millions have moved off furlough and returned to work, the labour market has shown strong signs of recovery, and earnings have risen at an unprecedented rate, and we face a distorted reflection of earnings growth. The latest ONS figures from August show an increase in average weekly earnings of 8.8% compared to the same time last year. Confirmed figures will be published next month, but we expect growth of 8% or more for May to July 2021. The relevant period earnings are taken into account as part of my uprating review. This year, as restrictions have lifted and we experienced an irregular statistical spike in earnings over the uprating review period, I'm clear that another one-year adjustment is needed. So tomorrow, I will introduce the Social Security Uprating of Benefits Bill. For 22-23 only, it will ensure the basic and new state pensions increase by 2.5% or in line with inflation, which is expected to be the higher figure this year. And as happened last year, it will again set aside the earnings element for 2022-23 before being restored for the remainder of this Parliament. This will ensure pensioners' spending power is preserved and protected from higher costs of living, but will also ensure that as we are having to make difficult decisions elsewhere across public spending, including freezing public sector pay, pensioners are not unfairly benefiting from a statistical anomaly. At a time when we have made tough decisions to restore the public finances which have impacted working people, such as freezing income tax personal thresholds at current levels, this would not be fair. Setting aside the earnings element is temporary and only for 1 year. This means we can and will apply the triple lock as usual from next year for the remainder of this Parliament in line with our manifesto commitment. While the earnings growth is a welcome sign of the country's overall economic recovery, given the unique and exceptional events of the past 18 months, this year's measure is being skewed and distorted, reflecting a technical and temporary period of reverting or rebounding earnings, the differing cohorts of people who were retained or made redundant. As a result, the earnings measure is a statistical anomaly and is not a real-life basis for considering this year's uprating of state pensions. As other commentators have said, for example, the Institute for Government, the figure for earnings growth is distorted. The increase is artificially high because so many workers were furloughed last year. The Social Market Foundation also endorses my proposal, stating that triple lock should be replaced with a double lock. Pensions would still rise, but less quickly, reducing the fiscal burden on the working age population. In addition to those receiving basic and new state pensions, this will apply to those receiving standard minimum guarantee in pension credit and widows and widowers' benefits in industrial death benefit. The bill will not extend to other benefits which are linked to prices, which I will review under the existing legislation, as I did last year. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government is committed to ensuring that older people can enjoy their retirement with security, dignity and respect, and that those who have worked hard and put in for decades can be confident that the state will be there to support them when they need it. Since 2010, the full yearly basic state pension has increased by over £2,050 in cash terms. There are also 200,000 fewer pensioners in absolute poverty, both before and after housing costs, than in 2009-10. I'm proud of our record on support for pensioners and of the action we took last year to ensure that pensioners' incomes continue to increase despite falling earnings among working-age taxpayers. Our recovery is based on the principles of fairness and sustainability as we level up opportunities across the country, invest in jobs, skills and public services while repairing the public finances. This is the fair and reasonable course of action given the temporary statistical anomalies in earnings we have seen this year as a result of unprecedented interventions in the economy and the labour market. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State Jonathan Reynolds.
Can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of her statement and for our telephone conversation this morning after the Cabinet meeting informing me that it would occur. Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe governments should keep their manifesto promises. It may be out of fashion, it may even seem old-fashioned, but that is what I believe and that is what is right. Before I address this announcement, I want to make some observations about the triple lock policy itself. The UK state pension is low by international comparison. It compares better when pension credit and the NHS are folded in, and a lot better when occupational pensions are considered. But the core state pension itself is still very important for millions of pensioners. The last Labour government drastically reduced the link between old age and living in poverty, but there can be no room for complacency. But the triple lock and the issue of indexation of the state pension is fundamentally about what the value of the state pension will be in future for working people today when they retire. So I reject the presentation of this issue as a source of intergenerational tension or unfairness, because we all have an interest in ensuring there is a decent state pension in future. And we should never present increased longevity as a problem. That people are living longer is a good thing. And it has come about because we have an NHS, because the school leaving age is no longer 14, because pioneering ministers of the past like Barbara Castle were prepared to fight for a decent pension and retirement system. And there is no doubt that the triple lock has made a significant contribution to restoring the value of the state pension following the Thatcher government's decision to break the link with earnings in 1980. So turning to the Secretary of State's proposals, the government's case, which is that the furlough data and the pandemic have produced a statistical aberration, has to be considered by us alongside the other decision made today, which also breaks the promises in the Conservative manifesto. And of course, we know the promise on international aid was also broken before the recess. It's more a triple letdown than a triple lock. So this decision isn't a one-off, but a significant repudiation of the basis upon which the government was elected. And it would be naive to say otherwise. So I would say to the Secretary of State, we simply cannot take the government on its word alone. Will they show us their analysis that has led to this decision? Will they explain why they couldn't assess the underlying levels of wage growth with the impact of furlough discounted? Will they publish the legal advice cited as the basis for this decision? Only then could any opposition or any MP make a decision on what is being proposed. Finally, I would say that whilst the Prime Minister is well known for making and breaking promises at will, and for frequently being economical with the facts, that does come at a cost, and that cost is a lack of trust. So I hope the Secretary of State appreciates that pensioners and workers, as well as the opposition, need fuller reassurance before any decision can be made on prospective legislation.
Secretary of State.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for having read the statement and recognising some of the challenges we face, and I accept it's his role as in the opposition to try and suggest that the government is perhaps not taking the right course of action. Where I disagree with him, if I think back, he refers to the earnings link that was dropped in the late 70s, I think, or early 80s, and it wasn't reinstated by his party, I think, until the late noughties, and actually wasn't actually commenced until it was the coalition government in place at the time. So that's why we followed the triple lock policy for the last decade, recognising that we wanted to restore that earnings link and to see an increase in pensions overall. And we've made good progress with that, as I've set out to the House, the £2,050 cash terms increase in just over a decade. In terms of the earnings link, I'm conscious that we've used this earnings link since the effect of the policy came into place, or a decade ago, and it's the same basis that we've made that, trying to, dare I say it, mess around with different bits of earnings. The ONS did some data, but we did not find it necessarily reliable on what could be considered a substantiated basis to make the change. I'm conscious that I've made the recommendation to the government, and that's been endorsed today, and I hope the House will endorse it in the forthcoming legislation to make, just as we did last year, set aside the earnings link, recognising the challenges of COVID and the implications that would have had last year directly on pensioners. I think the same fairness approach is there. I'm not intending, as is usual, to publish legal advice. The legal advice is quite straightforward. If I was to summarise it, is the best way to introduce this temporary set-aside is to do the legislation, just as we did last year. So it's on that basis that I intend to take this forward. In terms of making the comparisons with other countries, I'm conscious that we do have a substantial amount of occupational pension here. We also have a whole fringe of pensioner benefits that go alongside that were not necessarily available in many other countries. So I think just this year alone, or that's we're about to come to an end, while the pension cost is about £105 billion, we spend about £129 billion directly on pensioners, and I think that we genuinely have shown a measured approach in supporting pensioners during our time in office, and we think this is a sensible thing, which will be welcomed, I think, more broadly by the public to recognise the balancing act that we continue to face.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think we on this side of the House should be incredibly proud of the state pension triple lock. It's transformed the state pension landscape for retired people. No more derisory 75p pension increases as we saw under the party opposite when they were in government. And it's become a key part of the defences that we've built around